The store was supposed to be empty. It was 11 minutes past closing. The lights in the back had already been cut. The parking lot outside was dark and still. Then the three men walked in. And they didn't walk in like customers. They walked in like people who had already decided what was going to happen. The young cashier behind the counter was 18 years old. She had a geometry test tomorrow morning. She had never been truly afraid in her life until that exact moment. She didn't know that the man in aisle 7 had heard everything. She didn't know what he used to be. If stories like this one hit you somewhere deep, the kind that remind you what quiet courage actually looks like, then you're in the right place. Subscribe to this channel and follow this story all the way to the end, because what happens next is not something you'll want to miss. Hit that like button and drop a comment below telling me the city and country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now, let's begin. The Granger's Grocery on Delmore Avenue wasn't the kind of place anything ever happened. It was a mid-sized neighborhood store, the kind with fluorescent lighting that buzzed faintly in the produce section, with linoleum floors worn smooth near the registers from 30 years of foot traffic, with a deli counter that closed at 7 and a pharmacy window that nobody staffed past 5. The kind of store where the same dozen families came in every week, and the staff knew which regulars preferred paper bags over plastic. Steady, predictable, invisible, in the way only truly ordinary places can be. Nathan Cole liked it for exactly that reason. He pushed the cart slowly down the cereal aisle, Emma riding on the front of it the way he'd told her not to do 100 times. Her sneakers hooked through the metal bars and her elbows draped over the front rail like she was commanding a ship. She was 7. She did what she wanted, and he'd mostly stopped arguing about the small things. "That one," she said, pointing at a bright yellow box near the top shelf. "You don't even know what that is." "It has a cartoon tiger on it. That's not a reason." "It's a great reason," she said, completely serious. Nathan looked at the box, read the ingredients. 14 grams of sugar per serving. He put it in the cart. Emma smiled like she'd won a war. That was the thing about her. She probably had. She had his stubbornness and her mother's smile, and the combination was something Nathan had never figured out how to defend against in 7 years of trying. He suspected he never would. They moved through the rest of the store at the unhurried pace of a man who had nowhere better to be. Nathan wasn't shopping fast because he never shopped fast. Grocery runs were one of the only times during the week when he and Emma moved through the world without any particular pressure. No school drop-off clock, no maintenance call waiting, no schedule to keep. Just the two of them and the cart and the buzz of those ceiling lights. He worked as a maintenance supervisor at the Caldwell Center, a 12-story commercial building downtown that housed a mix of law firms, tech offices, and 2 floors of private medical practices. Decent pay. Structured hours, mostly. The kind of job that required competence without demanding that he be anything more than what he appeared to be. That suited Nathan fine. At 37, he had spent the better part of 4 years carefully constructing a life that looked unremarkable from every angle. The apartment on Teller Street, the beat-up Ford pickup with the cracked passenger mirror he kept meaning to fix, the standing Friday night pizza order from the place 2 blocks over. He was the neighbor who nodded in the hall, the employee who showed up early, the father who was always at the school pickup line. He was not, by any appearance or any introduction, someone with a history. People who had known him in another life would have found the grocery store version of Nathan Cole nearly unrecognizable. The man standing in the bread aisle comparing wheat loaf prices bore almost no resemblance, in movement, in manner, in the whole texture of how he occupied a room, to the operator who had spent 11 years running missions in places that didn't appear on official briefing documents. Places in the Middle East, Eastern Europe, twice in Southeast Asia. Operations that had no public record, no formal acknowledgement, no paper trail connecting any of it back to a man named Nathan Cole. He had left that life 4 years ago. Not because someone forced him out, not because he failed. He left because of Emma, and because of a night in a city he'd never speak the name of, and because he had looked at the person he was becoming and decided that person was not the father his daughter deserved. He didn't think about it often. On the days he did, he thought about it in the same way you'd press on a bruise, carefully, to make sure it was still there, and then you stopped pressing. "Dad," Emma said. "Hmm?" "The lady at the register looks nervous." Nathan looked up from the bread. He had already noticed. The cashier at Register 2 was a young woman. He'd seen her before, maybe 3 or 4 times during their usual Thursday evening runs. Early 20s, probably still in community college given her hours, wore her dark hair in a ponytail and always greeted Emma by name when they came through her line. She was pleasant in the effortless way that some young people are before the world has had enough time to wear them down. Right now, she was standing very still behind the counter. She wasn't processing a customer. There were no customers in her line. The store had thinned out in the last 20 minutes. The after-dinner rush had moved through, and what was left was scattered. Nathan and Emma, an older man in a motorized cart near frozen foods, a young couple with a handbasket near the wine section. The overhead speakers were playing something low and forgettable. The cashier wasn't looking at anything in particular. She was looking at the front entrance, and her hands were flat on the counter, not resting, flat, braced. Nathan put the bread in the cart. "Come here," he said quietly to Emma. She climbed down off the front of the cart without asking why. She'd learned, in the mostly unconscious way children absorb things from their parents, that when her father used that particular tone, you just moved. He steered them toward the back of the aisle, positioning the cart so he had a clear sight line to the front of the store. Through the broad front windows, he could see the parking lot. His truck was near the far end. 2 other cars he recognized from when they'd arrived. And a third vehicle, a dark blue panel van that had not been there 40 minutes ago. It was parked at an angle, not in a space. Engine running. He could see the faint exhaust. The front doors of the store slid open. 3 men came in. Nathan didn't react. He picked up a bag of pasta from the shelf and turned it over in his hands, and read nothing on it at all while he watched them in his peripheral vision. They didn't take baskets, didn't grab a cart, moved past the produce section without looking at anything on the shelves. One of them, the one in the gray hoodie, sleeves pushed up despite the October chill outside, said something to the other 2 that Nathan couldn't hear. The second one, taller, wearing a black jacket, moved left toward the far registers. The third peeled off toward the pharmacy end of the store. The one in the gray hoodie went straight toward the cashier. Nathan set the pasta in the cart. He crouched down to Emma's level, his voice easy, unhurried, the way you talk when you don't want a 7-year-old to remember the exact words later. "Hey, I need you to do something for me." "What?" "You know the break room in the back, where the lady gave you the juice box last time?" Emma nodded. "I want you to go find that same door and wait for me right inside it. Don't come back out until I come get you, okay?" She looked at him. 7 years old, and she already had her mother's way of reading a room. "Are those men bad?" "I don't know yet," he said, which was almost the truth. "But I want you somewhere safe while I figure it out." "Okay." She handed him the snack bar she'd been holding. "You should have this." He took it. Watched her walk toward the back of the store at a pace that was deliberate enough to be calm but quick enough that she understood something. She didn't look back. Good girl. Nathan straightened up and moved toward the front of the store. He didn't rush. He moved the cart into the nearest aisle and left it there, then came around toward the registers with the deliberate, unhurried gait of a man who'd forgotten something and was heading back for it. In his peripheral vision, he tracked all 3 men. Gray hoodie at the register, black jacket somewhere near the far end. Third man deeper in the pharmacy section. He got close enough to hear. The one in the gray hoodie was leaning on the counter. He was maybe 25, with a jaw that looked like it had been broken and badly reset, a thin scar running below his left eye. He was smiling, but not in a way that had anything pleasant behind it. "You about to close up?" he said to the cashier. Her name tag said Sophie. Sophie said 10 minutes. We close at 10. Perfect. He glanced over his shoulder at his friend, then back to her. Then it's just us, right? You and whoever else is still back there? Sophie's hands were still flat on the counter. My manager's in the back. Yeah? The man's smile didn't change. Call him out. He's on a phone call. I didn't ask what he was doing. I said call him out. Sophie reached for the intercom phone, and Nathan could see her hand trembling from 12 feet away. Whatever calculation was happening in her head, whether to call out, whether to signal something, whether to try to diffuse this or escalate it, she wasn't capable of thinking through it fast enough. She was 18 years old, and these men were not robbers in the ordinary sense. Nathan could read that much already. This wasn't someone grabbing a register till and running. They'd parked outside and staggered their entry and spread through the store in a pattern. They wanted control of the space, not just the cash. Hey, said the man in gray, sharper now. He snapped his fingers. I said call him. Sophie lifted the phone. Nathan said, excuse me. The man turned. Nathan was standing at the end of the checkout lane, hands loose at his sides, with the expression of a man who has mildly interrupted something he hasn't quite pieced together yet. He was wearing a faded gray Henley and jeans and work boots, with the look of someone who spent his days lifting things and didn't think particularly hard about his clothing. Sorry, Nathan said. I just need to grab… Do you sell AAA batteries behind the counter? I couldn't find them in the aisle. The man stared at him. Batteries, Nathan said again, helpfully. Sophie's eyes were very wide and very still. Get out, the man said. Nathan tilted his head slightly. Store's still open for 8 more minutes. I said get out. You a manager here? Nathan asked. Something shifted in the man's face. It went from annoyed to something colder. He reached into the front pocket of his hoodie, not all the way, just enough. Nathan saw the shape. He knew what it was. Okay, Nathan said. You know what? I'll check the aisle again. He walked back the way he'd come. Measured steps. Nothing fast. Not running. Not backing away awkwardly. He turned the corner and was out of their sight line. Then he stopped. He stood in the cleaning products aisle for 3 seconds with his back to the shelves and his eyes closed. Not panicking. Not freezing. Something else entirely. Something older. A kind of stillness that moved through him like water settling after you'd thrown a stone in it. He took inventory. 3 men. At least 1 weapon visible. Van outside with an engine running, meaning a 4th person, possibly more. Store nearly empty, but not entirely. Sophie at the register. Manager somewhere in back. Emma in the break room. The exits. Front doors, controlled by the men near the register. Emergency exit at the back, past the stockroom, code required. Loading dock, accessible through the stockroom if the manager hadn't locked it. He pulled out his phone and typed a text to 911. He knew some departments had text capability and had confirmed Delmore's dispatch did. He kept it short and specific. Armed men, Granger's Grocery, Grocery 1140, Delmore Ave, 3+ individuals. Hostage situation developing. 1 civilian child in back room. Do not send lights/sirens to front. Approach from loading dock side. He sent it and put his phone away. From the front of the store, he heard something he didn't like. Sophie's voice, higher now, saying, Please, I gave you everything in the drawer. And a man's voice answering, That's not what we're here for. Nathan moved. He came back around the corner quietly, and what he saw in the next moment crystallized everything. The man in gray had come around the counter. Sophie had backed against the wall behind the register. The second man, black jacket, had materialized from somewhere and was standing at the store entrance, watching the parking lot. The third, from the pharmacy section, was moving toward the back offices, going for the manager. Nathan made his decision in less time than it took to make any conscious thought about it. He moved to his right, cutting through an aisle, getting ahead of the third man's path toward the back. He came through a door marked Employees Only at a walk and nearly ran directly into a heavy-set man in his 50s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the expression of someone who had no idea what was happening on his sales floor. The man blinked. You can't be back here. I know, Nathan said quietly, keeping his voice below the level of the cameras and the ambient store noise. Your name? Garrett. I'm the duty manager. Garrett, there are 3 men in your store. One of them is heading back here right now. I need you to listen to me very carefully and not argue with me. Garrett stared at him. Who are you? Maintenance, from the Caldwell building. I shop here Thursdays. He said it like it mattered because right now it did. He needed this man to see him as something familiar. I've called for help, but until they get here, I need you to stay out of the sales floor. Sophie's out there. I know. I'm going back out. I need you to lock this door from your side and not open it for anyone who isn't in a uniform. Can you do that? Garrett was still staring. Behind them, from somewhere on the sales floor, there was a sharp sound. Something knocked off a shelf, or knocked over deliberately. Garrett, Nathan said. Yeah, the manager said. Yeah, okay. Good. Nathan moved back toward the door. Is there another way to the loading dock from here? Around the stockroom, left at the cold storage units. Thank you. He slipped back out and pulled the door shut behind him. The third man was in the cleaning aisle now, moving toward the employees' only door. Nathan came around the opposite end of the aisle and positioned himself in the man's path. But this time, there was no polite fiction about batteries. The man stopped when he saw Nathan. He was younger than the others. Late teens, maybe 20. He had the look of someone who had talked himself into being here and was still in the process of convincing himself he'd made the right decision. His eyes moved too much. "Back hallway," the young man said. "Move." "There's nobody back there," Nathan said. "I said move." Nathan looked at him for a long moment. "How old are you?" The young man's expression flickered. "What?" "I'm asking because you look like someone's kid." "Which you are. Everybody in this store is somebody's kid." He paused. "I have a daughter in this building right now, 7 years old. She is terrified." The young man's jaw tightened. His eyes moved again, back toward the front of the store, toward wherever his partners were. "Don't," Nathan said quietly. The young man shouted anyway. "He's back here!" Nathan moved. It was not a long or dramatic sequence of events. It was brief and mechanical, and it looked nothing like the movies. 2 seconds, maybe 3. When it was finished, the young man was sitting on the floor against the shelving unit with his wrist held at an angle that hurt enough to keep him very still, and Nathan was crouching beside him, voice low. "Don't yell again," Nathan said, "and don't move." From the front of the store, footsteps. The man in gray, coming fast. Nathan stood up, moved to the end of the aisle, and waited. The man in gray came around the corner at a run and pulled up when he found Nathan standing there instead of a cowering civilian. For a moment, they just looked at each other. The man reached into his pocket. "Don't," Nathan said again, the same word, the same tone. Something in the man's face changed. Not fear exactly, something more like recognition. The way a person looks when they've walked into a room and realized they've badly miscalculated the size of it. His hand came out of the pocket slowly. "Who are you?" he said. "I work here," Nathan said, which was true enough. The man took a step back. His eyes tracked down Nathan's arm. Nathan was wearing a Henley with the sleeves pushed up, and along his left forearm, starting at the wrist and running to just below the elbow, was a scar. Wide, pale, old. The kind of scar that didn't come from a kitchen accident or a childhood fall. The man in gray went very still. His eyes came back up to Nathan's face, and whatever he saw there, whatever quality of stillness or distance, or the particular way Nathan had been standing in that aisle like he was the only fixed point in a spinning room, made the man take another step back. "You were in the service," he said. It wasn't a question. Nathan didn't answer. "What branch?" Still nothing. The man's voice dropped. Something moved through it that wasn't quite fear but was related to it. "I know that scar," he said slowly. "That pattern. Burn and blade combined." He shook his head, almost to himself. Kozlov talked about a unit. After the Marbella job, he said there was a guy. They thought he was dead. Team called him the Ghost. Nathan looked at him. "That's not possible," the man said. "You're supposed to be—" "I'm the maintenance worker," Nathan said, "and I need you to sit down." In the distance, from the direction of the loading dock, a sound neither of them had expected. The firm knock of a door, and then voices. Organized, professional, moving in pattern. Help had arrived faster than Nathan had calculated. The man in gray made a decision. He turned and ran for the front entrance. He made it approximately 6 steps before the doors slid open and 2 officers came through them. Nathan didn't follow. He stayed where he was, in the cleaning products aisle, in the fluorescent buzz and the quiet. He straightened his sleeves down over his forearm, rolled them once, pushed them back up to where they'd been. He exhaled. Then he went to find his daughter. Emma was exactly where he'd told her to be, sitting just inside the break room door on a folding chair someone had left against the wall. The snack bar he'd given her half-eaten, her feet swinging about 8 inches off the floor. She looked up when he came in. "Is it done?" she asked. "It's done." She hopped off the chair and walked over and put her arms around his waist. He held her there for a moment longer than he usually would. She didn't say anything about that. "Can we still get the cereal?" she said into his shirt. He laughed. It came out rough and a little tired. "Yeah," he said. "We can still get the cereal." They went back out to the cart together, and the police were in the store, and Sophie from Register 2 was crying into a paper towel while an officer spoke to her, and Garrett the manager was giving a statement near the front, and the whole ordinary store had been briefly turned into something else, and was now slowly returning to itself. Nobody paid much attention to the man in the faded gray Henley pushing a cart with a 7-year-old hanging off the front of it. That was fine. That was exactly fine. The police were at the store for 2 hours and 40 minutes. Nathan knew this because he sat through most of it on a hard plastic chair near the customer service counter, drinking bad coffee from a styrofoam cup someone had handed him, while Emma slept against his arm with her mouth slightly open and her hair falling across his shoulder. She had made it through the initial excitement on sheer adrenaline, the officers arriving, the raised voices, the crackle of radios, and then crashed completely about 20 minutes in, the way children do, like a phone that goes from 40% to dead with no warning. 1 minute she was asking a uniformed officer if his handcuffs were real. The next she was out. Nathan didn't move her. He sat with his arm at a slightly awkward angle to keep her head from sliding and answered the detective's questions in the same flat, cooperative tone he used when a building inspector came through the Caldwell Center. Direct. Unhurried. Nothing volunteered beyond what was asked. The detective's name was Rourke, 50s, a gut that spoke to a lot of desk gears, reading glasses he kept putting on and taking off like they annoyed him. He had the look of a man who had heard every version of every story and was reasonably good at telling the difference between the ones that were complete and the ones with holes. "You said you were shopping," Rourke said. He was looking at his notepad, but Nathan could tell he was listening harder than he was reading. "Thursday is usually our night. We live about 12 minutes away." "And you happened to notice them come in?" "I noticed the van first," Nathan said. "Engine running, parked crooked. Then when they came in without taking carts or baskets and split up, yeah. It was obvious something was off." Rourke wrote something. "Most people notice something's off and leave. I had my daughter in the back. Most people grab their kid and leave." Nathan looked at him. The girl at the register was 18. The manager was about to walk into a situation he didn't understand, and the exits were already being watched. He paused. Leaving wasn't a clean option. Rourke tapped his pen against the notepad. "You have any training? Military? Security?" "I'm a maintenance supervisor at the Caldwell building on Prescott." Which was a true statement. It answered nothing Rourke had actually asked. The detective seemed to recognize this because he looked up from the notepad and studied Nathan for a moment with the particular patience of a man who is very tired and has decided to pick his battles. "The guy you detained in the back," Rourke said. "Wrist was sprained, possibly a minor fracture. He says you moved fast. He was heading toward the employees-only area. I got between him and the door." "How?" "Luck, mostly." Rourke put his reading glasses on, put them back off. "Mr. Cole." "Yeah. I'm not charging you with anything. I'm not suggesting you did anything wrong. Everybody in this store is going home tonight because of you." He set the notepad flat on his knee. "But I've been at this job for 22 years. I know what someone looks like when they've handled stress before. And I know what someone looks like when they've handled stress before in a professional context. Those are two different things." He waited. "I'm not writing any of this in the report. I'm asking because I'm curious." Nathan looked at Emma sleeping against his arm. He thought about what to say and how much of it to mean. "I was in the Navy," he said, "a long time ago. It doesn't come up much." Rourke nodded slowly, in the way of someone who accepts an answer without entirely accepting it. He closed the notepad. "We'll need a formal statement tomorrow. You able to come in?" "I'll bring Emma to school first. I can be there by 9. 9's fine." Rourke stood, knees creaking. He looked down at Emma, then back at Nathan. Something in his expression shifted. Not softness exactly, but the recognition one person has for another when they see them doing something genuinely hard without making a production of it. "You need anything tonight? We can have a car." "We're good," Nathan said. "Thank you." He carried Emma to the truck. She woke briefly when he buckled her seatbelt, looked at him with the half-focused eyes of a child still mostly asleep, and said, "We forgot the cereal." "I know." "You owe me cereal." "I know that too." She was back asleep before he pulled out of the lot. He drove home through streets that were quiet and wet from an earlier rain he hadn't noticed while they were inside. The truck's heater was slow to start, and he drove the first few minutes in the cold without turning on the radio. I was thinking, the way he always thought after something like this. Not with panic or with the emotional residue that most people carry out of high-stress situations, but with a kind of systematic review. What he'd done, what he should have done differently, where the gaps were. The man in gray had recognized the scar. That was the part Nathan kept returning to. The scar on his left forearm was old, 11 years old, picked up during an operation in a city he no longer allowed himself to name, from a situation that had gone wrong in 4 different ways at once. It had healed badly because the conditions for healing had been bad. The result was a wide, pale stripe of tissue that ran from wrist to elbow in a pattern that didn't look quite like any ordinary injury, because it wasn't. He'd spent 4 years rolling his sleeves down over it without thinking. Tonight he hadn't, because it was a Thursday grocery run, and he wasn't thinking about his forearm. I was thinking about bread and cereal and whether Emma needed new shoes before the weather turned. But the man in gray had known what he was looking at, had known the term burn and blade combined, had mentioned a name, Kozlov, and a job called Marbella, and a unit, and he'd used a word that Nathan hadn't heard in 4 years. Ghost. Nathan didn't know the man, didn't recognize his face or his associates, but somewhere in the chain of people who knew that name, there was a connection Nathan didn't fully understand yet, and in his experience, unknown connections had a way of becoming problems. He pulled into the lot on Teller Street and sat in the truck for a moment after he killed the engine, watching the building entrance out of old habit. Nothing. Just the lobby light and the half-broken intercom panel he'd put in a maintenance request for twice and been ignored on twice. He got Emma out of the truck and carried her up to the apartment. Put her to bed without fully undressing her. Just shoes off, jacket off, a blanket pulled up. She made a small sound that wasn't quite a word and turned onto her side. He stood in the doorway of her room for a little longer than he needed to. Then he went to the kitchen and stood at the counter and didn't make anything. He wasn't hungry. He filled a glass with water and drank half of it and set it down and looked at his left forearm in the kitchen light. 4 years. He'd been good at this. At being invisible. At becoming genuinely ordinary, not just performing it. The apartment, the job, the Thursday grocery run. It wasn't a cover. It was a life. His life. The only version of it he wanted. He pulled his sleeve down and went to bed. He didn't sleep well, but that wasn't new. Wow. The next morning, he dropped Emma at Carver Elementary at 7:52, walked her to the front door because she liked it when he walked her all the way to the door on the morning she was still slow waking and needed the extra time, and then sat in the truck in the drop-off zone for a moment after she disappeared inside. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer it. Unknown numbers usually meant the building management company or a vendor inquiry, neither of which he had time for before a 9 o'clock statement. But something in him, some leftover professional instinct that never fully quieted, made him pick up. "Nathan Cole," he said. A brief pause. Then a woman's voice, controlled, precise, the kind of voice that was used to being listened to. "Mr. Cole, my name is Victoria Sterling. I'm told you were at Granger's grocery last night." He watched a minivan pull out of the drop-off lane in front of him. "Who told you that?" "My head of security reviewed the incident report this morning as part of a routine assessment. Granger's is a property affiliated with one of our holding companies. When the report flagged an unusual civilian intervention, I made some calls." Another pause, shorter. "I understand you spoke to a Detective Rourke." "I gave a statement, yes." "Mr. Cole, I'd like to meet with you." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, a crossing guard was waving a group of kids across the intersection with the particular weary authority of someone who'd done the same thing for 15 years and would do it for 15 more. "Why?" he said. "Because the men who entered that store last night were not there by coincidence. They were connected to a situation that involves my company, and based on what Detective Rourke's report describes, and what the young man you detained apparently said to officers before his attorney arrived, I think you may understand more about that than the police currently do." He let that sit. "What did he say?" Nathan asked. He asked the arresting officer if anyone had confirmed who the man in the store actually was. He was apparently quite insistent about it. A beat. He said the word ghost twice before his lawyer shut him down. Nathan put the truck in drive. "Where?" he said. "Oh." Victoria Sterling's offices occupied the top 3 floors of a glass and steel tower on Meridian Avenue that Nathan had driven past 100 times without thinking about. Sterling Technology Group. He'd seen the logo on the building and had categorized it as exactly what it appeared to be. Another tech company with too much money and a fondness for architectural statements. The lobby alone was the kind of space designed to make visitors feel they had entered somewhere important. High ceilings, pale stone floors, a reception desk that looked like it belonged in an art installation. Nathan walked through it in his work jacket and scuffed boots and got the precise look from the desk attendant that the space was engineered to produce, the subtle recalibration of someone wondering if you'd come to the right building. "Nathan Cole," he said, "I have a meeting." He was taken up on a private elevator by a man in a dark suit who introduced himself as Marcus and did not elaborate further. The elevator opened directly into a conference room on the 31st floor with a view of the city that Nathan assessed instinctively and professionally, sightlines, entry points, glass coverage, before he caught himself doing it and stopped. Victoria Sterling was already in the room. She was younger than he'd expected from the voice, though he couldn't have said exactly why. 30, maybe 31, with dark hair pulled back and the kind of bone structure that photographed well and looked even better without a camera. She was wearing a gray blazer over a black top and standing by the window when he came in, not sitting behind the table in the power position she could have chosen. He registered that. It was a deliberate choice. She extended a hand. "Thank you for coming." He shook it. Her grip was direct, no performance in it. "You didn't leave much room to say no," something close to a smile. "I'm aware. Sit down, please." He sat. She sat across from him, not at the head but directly across, which he also registered. "I'll be direct," she said. "My company is currently dealing with a significant internal security situation. Approximately 3 months ago, I became aware that someone with executive-level access has been moving proprietary data, contracts, development timelines, partnership agreements, in a way that suggests coordination with an outside party. We've kept it internal so far, working with a private security firm, trying to identify the source before going public or involving law enforcement." "That sounds like something for your security firm," Nathan said. "It was. Until last night." She folded her hands on the table. They were steady, he noticed. She'd had time to be afraid of this and had moved through that into something more functional. "The 3 men at Granger's were hired through a cutout. The original contract traces, and this is according to my security lead this morning, to a shell company connected to a man named Harlan Voss." She said the name like she expected it to mean something to him. It didn't. He kept his face even. "Voss was my company's co-founder," she said. "We had a legal separation 2 years ago when it became clear our visions for the company were incompatible. He walked away with a settlement and no governance role." She paused. "I have reason to believe he's now attempting to destabilize the company enough to force a board intervention that would give him re-entry." Nathan looked at her. "And the men at the store?" "Were looking for me." She said it quietly, but without tremor. "I was supposed to be at that location last night. I attend a standing monthly meeting with a nonprofit board that uses the community room at Granger's. I canceled 3 hours before because of a schedule conflict." She met his eyes. "Someone in my organization told them where I'd be, which means the internal leak and Voss are connected." He sat with that for a moment. "Ms. Sterling," he said. "Victoria." "Victoria. I'm a maintenance supervisor. I happened to be in a grocery store last night, and I made some calls and got lucky. Whatever you think I am based on a police report, I don't think you're a maintenance supervisor who got lucky," she said. "I think you're a man who hasn't been a maintenance supervisor his whole life, and I think the person those men briefly spoke about before lawyering up, the one they called Ghost, is sitting across from me right now." She held his gaze without any aggression in it, just steadiness. "I'm not asking you to confirm anything. I'm asking if you'd be willing to consult, confidentially, on the security side of what my firm is already doing." Nathan looked at the view behind her. The city was bright in the morning, all that glass throwing light in every direction. "I have a daughter," he said. "She's 7, she has school and soccer on Saturdays, and she's supposed to be in a play in December. I have a job that expects me in by 8 every morning and a truck that needs new tires before winter." He looked back at Victoria. "My life is very specifically arranged to be exactly what it looks like." "I understand that." "I don't think you do, because people who understand that don't call and say what you just said." She didn't flinch. She also didn't push. She reached into a folder on the table and slid a single page across to him. He looked down at it. It was a photograph. Security camera still, from what looked like a parking structure. Two men standing near a car. One of them he didn't know. The other one's profile he recognized in the same instant a person recognizes their own name being called in a crowd. He kept his face still. "That was taken 6 days ago," Victoria said, "outside my residential building." She waited. "Do you know who that man is?" Nathan looked at the photograph for 3 more seconds. Then he slid it back across the table. "Where did you get this?" he said. "Our security lead pulled it as part of the broader surveillance package when we expanded the investigation." She kept her voice level. "I take it you recognize him." "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." She watched him. "Nathan, whatever history is in that photograph, whatever it means to you, it's now inside something that's happening to me, to my company, to the people who work there." A slight fracture in the composure, the first one, just at the edge of her voice. "Last night was supposed to be me in that store." He stood up, walked to the window, stood there with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking out at the city that he'd chosen 4 years ago for exactly the reasons that were now being systematically dismantled. From behind him, Victoria said, "I have a meeting in 20 minutes. I'm not going to pressure you, but I'll be honest, I don't have many options I trust right now. The leak is somewhere in my executive circle. My security firm is good, but they're working blind on the human intelligence side." A pause. "You apparently have a different kind of visibility." He turned back from the window. "I want 2 things," he said. "If I talk to your security people, and I mean talk, I'm not taking a role, I'm not signing anything, I'm not going on record. I need everything you have on Voss. The separation agreement, the board correspondence, whatever communication you've flagged from the internal source." He stopped. "And nobody knows Emma exists. Not your security team, not your people. Her name doesn't go anywhere near this." Victoria didn't hesitate. "Agreed. And whatever that photograph is connected to," he said, "I need a copy of it." She looked at him for a moment. Something moved across her face that wasn't quite surprise and wasn't quite relief, but occupied the space between them. "I'll have Marcus make you one before you leave." He nodded, looked at his watch. "I have a 9 o'clock statement to give." "I know. I won't keep you." He was almost to the elevator when she spoke again. "Nathan." He stopped. "Last night," she said. "The cashier, Sophie. She's one of our tenant employees through the holding company. I spoke to her this morning." She paused. "She said a man with a gray shirt stayed calm when nobody else did, and that she doesn't know how to explain it, except that she was less scared when he was there." He didn't turn around. "She's going to be fine," he said. "She handled herself." "She said the same thing about you." He stepped into the elevator. Moten. Rourke's precinct was a 20-minute drive with parking. Nathan sat in the detective's office for 45 minutes, gave a statement that was accurate in everything it included and silent on everything it didn't, signed the form, and drove to the Caldwell Center. He was 40 minutes late. His deputy, a compact woman named Deb, who had worked building maintenance for 20 years and held genuine contempt for anyone who confused busyness with efficiency, gave him a look when he came through the service entrance. "You look like you slept in your car," she said. "Building had a thing last night." "Which building?" "Grocery store." She stared at him. "Those aren't the same thing." Close enough." He grabbed his checklist off the board. "What's backed up?" "HVAC unit on 7's throwing the same error code it threw in March. Freight elevator needs the sensor recalibrated again. And the law firm on 9 called about water pressure in the executive bathroom for the 4th time this month, which at this point I think is a personality problem and not a plumbing problem." "I'll start with 7, he said. He spent the rest of the morning inside the building's mechanical infrastructure, the ducts and pump rooms and electrical panels that were his actual area of professional competence, and that required a specific kind of focused, patient attention that suited him. He liked the work in the way that people like tasks that demand their mind without demanding they explain themselves. A broken thing either worked or it didn't. The diagnosis was honest. The fix was or wasn't sufficient. There was no ambiguity to manage. Around 11:30, he ate lunch in the service corridor on the 4th floor with his back to the wall and his eyes on the door, which he did everywhere out of habit he'd long stopped trying to break. He ate a sandwich he'd packed the night before everything happened, from the groceries he'd already had at home. He thought about the photograph. The man in the parking structure, standing beside someone connected to Harlan Voss. His name was Carver Doyle. Nathan hadn't used that name in 4 years, hadn't said it out loud, hadn't thought about it more than in the way you think about something buried, aware that it's there, committed to leaving it there. Carver Doyle had been a contract intelligence handler who operated on the outer edge of the network Nathan's unit fed into. Not a field operator, a coordinator. The kind of man who knew where things were going without being in them, and who made a living from that knowledge. If Doyle was standing outside Victoria Sterling's building, he wasn't there as a coincidence, and he wasn't there as a tourist. He was there because someone was paying him to know something, which meant the situation with Voss was not a straightforward corporate power play. It had a layer Nathan hadn't seen yet. He finished the sandwich, balled up the wrapper, went back to work. At 3:15, his phone buzzed. A message from an encrypted app he'd downloaded that morning at Victoria's request. Her security lead had sent him access, and he'd installed it in the truck before going into the precinct. The message was brief. Package ready. Can send digitally or have Marcus drop physical copy. Your call. He typed back, physical. Not my office. Coffee place called Hendrix on Sailor, tomorrow, 7 a.m. Tell Marcus to leave it at the counter under my name. 3 minutes later, done. He put the phone away and went to recalibrate the freight elevator sensor, which took him 40 minutes and 2 wrong diagnoses before he found the actual fault. Not the sensor at all, but a wire junction behind the panel that had corroded slightly and was throwing intermittent false readings. He fixed it with what he had, made a note to order a replacement part, tested it 4 times. It worked. He drove to Carver Elementary at pickup and stood in the line of parents in the late afternoon cold with his hands in his jacket pockets and thought about nothing in particular until Emma came through the doors and crossed the yard at the loose-limbed run she used when she was happy, which was most of the time. She had a drawing. She held it up before she even said hello. "It's a dog," she announced. He looked at it. It was a large orange circle with 4 lines coming out of the bottom and 2 dots and a curved line on top. "I can see that." "His name is Biscuit. We don't have a dog." "I know." She tucked the drawing under her arm. "That's why I drew him." She reached up and took his hand as they walked back to the truck, which she only did when she wasn't thinking about it, which he had learned to never comment on because the moment he did, she'd stop. "Are we getting the cereal tonight?" "Tomorrow." "You said that last night." "Last night I meant today. Today I mean tomorrow." He opened the passenger door. "Get in." She climbed in and sat down and started digging through the backpack she'd thrown on the floor. He walked around to his side and sat down and started the truck. "Dad," she said. "Yeah." "Were you scared last night?" He thought about that. He pulled out of the lot and onto the street before he answered, because it was a real question and it deserved an honest answer, even if he had to figure out what honest actually looked like here. "A little," he said. "Because of me?" "Because of you and the girl at the register and the manager in the back and everyone else in that building." He checked his mirror. "When people are in danger, being scared is appropriate. It means you're paying attention." Emma thought about this with the serious expression she used when she was actually processing something rather than just listening. "But you didn't run." "No." "Why?" He watched the road. An older woman crossing at a light, a kid on a bike cutting the corner too close. The whole ordinary moving world. "Because sometimes you're the one who can help," he said. "And when that's true, running is the same as doing the harm yourself." Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she unzipped her backpack and pulled out a library book and opened it on her lap, apparently satisfied with the answer in the way that 7-year-olds sometimes are satisfied with things that adults would need 3 more conversations to get to. Nathan drove them home through the early dark, through the wet streets and the amber lights, past the Granger's parking lot, where there was still a strip of police tape attached to one of the lot markers and flapping loosely in the wind. He didn't look at it for long, but he looked. That evening, after Emma was in bed with her book and her dog drawing taped to the wall above her desk, Nathan sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open and spent 2 hours on the background. He could pull through open channels on Harlan Voss, corporate filings, board records, press items from the separation, a profile in a business publication from 3 years ago that had been mostly flattering and was now reading very differently in context. Voss was smart. That was the first and most consistent impression. Methodical. patient. The kind of person who thought in longer timelines than most people could sustain attention for. The separation from Sterling Tech had been framed publicly as mutual and amicable. The actual documentation, from what Victoria had described, was something else. Nathan was not afraid of smart, patient people. He was familiar with them. He closed the laptop at 10:15, washed the coffee mug he'd used, and stood at the kitchen window for a moment looking at the street below. Quiet night. A car he didn't recognize parked 2 spaces down from his usual spot, which he logged and checked against his mental map and determined was probably a neighbor. He didn't know well with a different car than usual, which happened, which was the normal explanation, which didn't stop him from noting the plate number before he pulled the blinds. He went to bed. This time, he slept. Not easily, and not all the way through, but enough. The folder Marcus left at Hendricks the next morning was thicker than Nathan expected. He picked it up at 7:03, ordered a black coffee he didn't particularly want, and sat in the back corner with his jacket still on and the folder on the table in front of him. Hendricks was the kind of place that attracted early morning regulars who were serious about being left alone, people with laptops and noise-canceling headphones and the specific body language of someone who has chosen this particular table for a reason. Nobody looked at him. Nobody cared. That was why he'd picked it. He opened the folder. Victoria's security team had put together a thorough package. Corporate structure charts for the holding entities connected to Voss, financial movement records from the period after the separation, communication logs flagged for anomalous patterns. There were also 3 photographs beyond the parking structure image, all taken from fixed surveillance positions, all within the past 5 weeks. 2 of them showed Voss meeting with men Nathan didn't recognize in locations that had no obvious business rationale. A hotel lobby in the financial district, a parking level of a building that Nathan's eye told him was somewhere outside the city center, maybe industrial corridor. The 3rd photograph showed Carver Doyle again. This time he was alone, coming out of a building that Nathan recognized immediately despite the angle. He recognized it because he drove past it every morning on the way to Carver Elementary. It was 3 blocks from Emma's school. He sat with that for a long moment. The coffee cooled beside him untouched. Doyle being near Victoria's building was one kind of problem. Doyle being near Emma's school was a different category entirely, and Nathan's mind moved through what that meant with the cold, systematic efficiency that he'd spent 4 years trying to unpair from his daily functioning. It came back without effort. That was the thing nobody told you about that kind of training. You didn't leave it behind. You just put it in a room and closed the door, and it waited, and when something opened the door, it was all still there, perfectly arranged, exactly where you'd left it. He did not assume the worst. He noted the fact and kept it separate from the conclusions he would allow himself to draw until he had more to draw from. He turned to the communication logs. Victoria's security team had flagged 11 exchanges over a 4-month period. Internal messages that had moved through Sterling Tech's encrypted company system but showed routing anomalies suggesting they'd been copied to an external destination before deletion. The content of the messages themselves had been partially reconstructed, enough to see the shape of what was being passed. Meeting schedules, board agenda items, a document reference to a partnership negotiation with a firm in South Korea that had apparently been the company's most sensitive active deal. The source of the messages could not be definitively identified, but the access pattern pointed to someone with senior credentials. The security team had narrowed it to 4 individuals: the chief operating officer, the head of legal, the director of strategic partnerships, and Victoria's own executive assistant. Nathan looked at the names. He didn't know any of them. Didn't need to yet. What he needed was the thing Victoria's security firm apparently didn't have: a way into the human side of it. Surveillance data told you what happened. It rarely told you why, or who was afraid of what, or which of 4 people had been quietly desperate for long enough to make a decision they couldn't walk back. He closed the folder, finished the cold coffee in 2 swallows, and drove to the Caldwell Center. He called Victoria from the service stairwell on the 3rd floor at 9:20, which was the only place in the building where he could reliably get a signal without it going through the building's internal router. She picked up on the 2nd ring. "You got the package?" "I did. Your team did good work." He kept his voice low from habit. "I need to talk to you about Doyle." A brief pause. "The man in the photograph. You know his name?" "We identified him yesterday afternoon. Carver Doyle. independent intelligence contractor, background in signals analysis before he went private sector. Does that name mean something to you? He thought about how to answer that and what it cost him. We operated in overlapping circles a long time ago. He was a coordinator. He moved information between units and handled contact management for operations that needed an arm's-length layer. Was he trustworthy? Nathan looked at this concrete wall of the stairwell. Somewhere above him, a door opened and closed, footsteps moving down a corridor. He was effective. Trustworthy is a different question. Men like Doyle don't have allegiances in the way that word usually means. They have clients. They serve whoever has the current contract, and they do it with complete professionalism. Which means right now his client is Voss. Most likely. Which means Voss isn't just doing corporate disruption. He's paying for real intelligence infrastructure. That's not a man trying to get back on a board. That's someone running a sustained operation. He paused. Victoria. One of the photographs puts Doyle within 3 blocks of a school. Silence on the line. Then, carefully, which school? He didn't answer that directly. I need you to understand something. I said Emma's name stays out of this, and you agreed. That agreement becomes harder to honor if Doyle already knows things that connect me to this situation. Because if Voss has Doyle, and Doyle ran a background on the incident at the grocery store, then it's possible I'll find out what Doyle has, she said. Her voice had changed. Not harder exactly. More focused. The way someone sounds when they stop processing information and start making decisions. We have a contact at the private registry Doyle has used in the past. I'll make the call today. Don't use anyone in your executive circle for that, not until you know which of the 4 it is. Another pause, longer this time. You read the communication analysis. Yes. And? He considered it. I don't know your people. I can't tell you who it is from a file, but the routing pattern your team identified, the deletion timing, it's consistent with someone who's been doing this for a while and is getting more confident. The gaps between the flagged communications got shorter over the last 6 weeks. That's either someone who's decided the risk is worth accelerating or someone who's been told a deadline is approaching. A deadline, she said flatly, like an acquisition move. Or a board intervention. Whatever Voss is building toward, someone inside your organization knows the timeline, and they're moving faster because it's getting close. He heard her exhale. Not a dramatic sound. Just the sound of someone absorbing something they'd already suspected and hoped not to have confirmed. What do you need from me? A meeting with your security lead. Just us 3. Off your company campus, nothing logged in your system. He thought about it. And I need to understand the South Korea partnership. The document your team flagged. How close is that deal to closing? 3 weeks? Maybe 4? It's the largest acquisition in the company's history. If it falls apart or the terms are leaked to a competing bidder, it would destabilize the company's valuation significantly, which would give Voss grounds to argue to the board that current leadership is failing. She said it without self-pity, just the arithmetic of it. He doesn't need to destroy the company, he just needs to make it look ungovernable. Then that's the pressure point, Nathan said. Whatever happens next, it's going to be aimed at that deal. He heard a door open above him in the stairwell. I need to get back to work. I'll be available after 5. I'll arrange the meeting for this evening, 7 o'clock. Text the address through the encrypted app. Nothing else through that channel. Keep it to logistics only. Understood. A brief pause, and he was about to disconnect when she added, Nathan, the photograph, the one near the school. Her voice was even, but there was something underneath it. I'm sorry, I know you didn't ask for any of this. He didn't have an easy answer for that. 7 o'clock, he said, and ended the call. He went back to work. He spent the rest of the morning on a slow, systematic check of the building's fire suppression system that he'd been putting off for 2 weeks, moving floor by floor with his clipboard and his meter and the particular blend of attention that the job required. It was detail work. It kept his hands busy and left a portion of his mind free to run parallel tracks, which was fine. He'd always been able to do 2 things at once. It was occasionally useful and occasionally a problem, and today he was choosing to let it be useful. By lunchtime, he'd made a list of things he knew and things he didn't. What he knew, Voss had resources and patience and at least one experienced intelligence contractor working for him. The operation against Victoria was multi-layered. An internal leak feeding information, Doyle handling external surveillance and coordination, the men at the grocery store representing either a preliminary action or a warning. The South Korea deal was the obvious target. Someone with senior access inside Sterling Tech was the mechanism. What he didn't know, Doyle's current information picture. Whether Doyle had identified Nathan specifically from the grocery store incident, or whether the ghost reference had stayed contained to the men who were now in custody and their lawyer. What Voss's actual endgame looked like, acquisition, or something else. And whether the school proximity was surveillance on Victoria through a connection she hadn't disclosed, or something that pointed directly at Nathan himself. That last one was the one he kept returning to. He ate lunch at his desk and called the encrypted app contact for the third time that week. Not Victoria this time, but a man named Pryor. He had located through a channel he'd maintained at low frequency since leaving his previous life, the way you keep a spare key somewhere you hope to never need. Pryor was not a friend. He was a reliable source of specific kinds of information for people who knew how to ask properly, and Nathan had paid him twice in 4 years for things that hadn't become necessary, but that Nathan had decided were worth knowing anyway. He gave Pryor the specifics on Doyle's recent activity and asked for a current client picture. Pryor said 48 hours. Nathan said he'd prefer 24. Pryor said that would cost more. Nathan said fine and ended the call. At 2:15, Deb knocked on his office doorframe and told him the law firm on 9 had called again about the water pressure. It's a flow restrictor in their supply line, Nathan said. Building standard is 0.5 gallons per minute for executive fixtures. They want more. They're not going to get more, because more would mean adjusting the whole floor's system. Should I tell them that? Tell them I'll come up and explain it personally. They're not going to like that. They haven't liked anything about this building since they moved in, he said. Doesn't seem to have stopped them from renewing their lease. Deb made a sound that might have been a laugh in better lighting and went back to her desk. He went up to 9 and spent 25 minutes with the firm's office manager, a tired-looking man in his 40s named Phil, who was clearly embarrassed to be having the conversation and had been put up to it by someone above him. Nathan explained the system, explained what was physically possible within the building's infrastructure, and suggested a flow rate adjustment on their kitchen fixtures that would not require restructuring the supply line and would give them a marginal improvement they could present to whoever was complaining as a resolution. Phil looked relieved in the way of a man who has been handed a face-saving option. I appreciate it, Phil said. The partners can be... He stopped himself. Particular, Nathan offered. Phil smiled. That's one word for it. On the elevator back down, Nathan thought about what Victoria had said. I know you didn't ask for any of this. He'd been thinking about that on and off since the stairwell call, turning it over with the same mild irritation he'd feel toward a pebble in a shoe. Because she was right, obviously. He had not asked for any of it. He'd been in a grocery store buying cereal with his daughter, and a situation had materialized around him the way situations sometimes did, regardless of how carefully you'd arranged your life to prevent them. But the honest accounting was more complicated than that. The truth, the version Nathan admitted only to himself, and only in the particular quietness of 3 in the morning when sleep had abandoned him, was that part of him had recognized what was happening in that store, not just with trained reflex, but with something that felt uncomfortably like relief. Not at the danger, never at the danger, but at the clarity of it. The simple, absolute clarity of a situation where the problem was visible and the response was within his capability and the stakes were real. There was no ambiguity to manage, no maintenance request to prioritize against another, no performance review or budget approval or water pressure complaint to navigate. Just a clear problem, and him, and the narrow window to do something about it. He had spent 4 years telling himself that clarity was something he didn't need anymore, that the ordinary texture of his life, the apartment, the job, Emma's drawings taped above her desk, was sufficient, and not just sufficient, but genuinely better than anything he'd traded it for. And he believed that. He still believed that. But the relief had been there. He didn't love himself for it. He didn't think it changed what mattered. But he was honest enough, on his better days, to look at the things in himself that were inconvenient and not pretend they weren't there. He picked Emma up at 3:30 and drove her to her after-school program at the Willow Street Community Center, where she attended a twice-weekly art class that she had been militantly devoted to since September. He walked her to the door and watched her disappear inside, and then stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking up and down the block in both directions. Nothing out of place. Ordinary street, ordinary afternoon, two kids on scooters and a woman walking a dog that was in a disagreement with the leash about direction. He drove back to the Caldwell Center and finished his shift. At 6:40, he picked Emma up from the community center. She had made something she described as a landscape, and that appeared to be a very energetic application of blue and green paint to a piece of cardboard. Drove her home, made pasta with jarred sauce and a salad that Emma ate around rather than through, and called his neighbor Mrs. Patel. Mrs. Patel was 71, recently widowed, and had an arrangement with Nathan going back 2 years wherein she sat with Emma on the evenings Nathan needed coverage, and Nathan handled anything in her apartment that required a ladder or a tool. It was the kind of arrangement that worked because both parties understood its value without needing to discuss it. "She's no trouble," Mrs. Patel said, as she always said, settling herself on the couch with the television remote and a cup of tea. Emma was already on the floor with her paints, not listening to either of them. "I'll be back by 10, Nathan said. "Maybe 9:30. "Take your time," Mrs. Patel waved a hand. "We're watching the baking show." Emma looked up. "I didn't agree to that." "You lost the remote argument last time," Mrs. Patel said. Emma pointed at Nathan. "This is your fault." "Good night," Nathan said, and left before she could develop a counter-argument. The meeting Victoria had arranged was at a restaurant called Lassiter's on the west side, the kind of mid-range place with good acoustics and enough ambient noise to make quiet conversations genuinely private. Nathan arrived 7 minutes early, as he always did, took a table in the back with sightlines to both the entrance and the kitchen corridor, and ordered water. Victoria came in at 6:58. She was dressed differently from their first meeting, less formal, a dark sweater and slacks rather than the blazer, which Nathan noticed because it suggested she'd also been thinking about not being recognized. Behind her was a man Nathan hadn't met, early 40s, military short hair going gray at the temples, a build that said he'd been serious about physical conditioning for a long time. He moved the way people move when they've been trained to assess a room when they enter it, which meant he was doing exactly what Nathan had already done. And when their eyes briefly intersected across the restaurant, there was the small mutual recognition of two people who were performing the same calculation. "This is Dean Marsh," Victoria said, sitting down. "He runs our security operations." Marsh sat. He looked at Nathan with the direct, professionally neutral expression of a man taking inventory. "Former Navy," he said. It wasn't a question. "Former," Nathan confirmed. "You?" "Army, 8th Special Forces. Did 12 years before private sector." He said it the way people say things they're no longer particularly proud of or ashamed of, just facts. "I read Rourke's incident report from the store. You contained 3 individuals, prevented a hostage situation, managed a civilian child and 2 additional civilian bystanders, and coordinated law enforcement entry without a radio or direct communication channel." A pause. "In a grocery store." "It worked out," Nathan said. "It worked out because you knew what you were doing." Marsh's voice wasn't admiring exactly. It was the tone of a professional acknowledging craft. "I'm not going to play games about what I think your background is. I'd rather use the next hour productively." "Agreed." Nathan looked at Victoria. "You said you'd look into Doyle's information picture." "I made the call," she said. "Our contact came back with a partial." She opened a small leather notebook, old-fashioned, which he respected. Nothing digital in a room with this conversation. Doyle's current contracted work shows 3 active clients. Voss is almost certainly one of them, based on the connection we'd already established. The second is a firm in real estate that's unconnected. The third... She stopped. "What?" Nathan said. She glanced at Marsh, then back to Nathan. "The third flag on Doyle's recent activity is a background inquiry, filed through a private registry 10 days ago. The subject is a Nathan Cole, listed occupation as building maintenance, residence on Teller Street." The restaurant noise continued around them. Someone laughed at a table nearby. A server called something to the kitchen. Nathan looked at the table for a moment, then he said, "What depth?" "Surface package," Marsh said. "Employment, residence, vehicle registration. No financials, no extended background." "Does the filing include family information?" Marsh met his eyes. "Not in what our contact retrieved, but a surface package is usually a precursor." Nathan nodded slowly. The thing he'd been holding carefully at a slight distance since seeing that photograph. The school, the 3 blocks, the specific flavor of dread that had nothing to do with himself, settled fully into the room with them. "Then we're not on the same timeline, I thought," he said. "What do you mean?" Victoria asked. "I thought Voss was moving toward the board intervention through the Korea deal." "That's still true. But Doyle filing a background on me means they know there's a variable they didn't plan for. The grocery store wasn't supposed to happen the way it happened. Someone was supposed to get to you that night, and instead they got identified and arrested and connected, however loosely, to a man Voss doesn't have a file on yet." He looked at her. "They're not just pressing toward the deadline. They're trying to understand what I am before deciding what to do about me." "And once they figure that out," Victoria said. He didn't answer that directly. "How well do you trust the 4 people on your internal flag list?" "I trusted all of them a month ago," she said, which was honest. "Now I don't know." "Walk me through them." She did. The COO was a man named Philip Graves, 15 years with the company, predating Victoria's ascension to CEO, old enough in tenure to feel a certain proprietary relationship with the company's direction. The head of legal was a woman named Sandra Cho, exceptionally competent, had recently gone through a divorce that had apparently been financially difficult. The director of strategic partnerships was a man named Ray Okonkwo, 38, ambitious, had been passed over for a promotion the previous year in favor of an external hire. And the executive assistant was a young woman named Danny Flores, 26, who had been with Victoria for 3 years and who Victoria spoke about with a visible reluctance to believe what she was being asked to consider. Nathan listened to all of it. He didn't take notes. "The Korea deal documentation," he said when she finished. "Who had direct access to the full partnership terms? Not summary access, the actual agreement language." Victoria thought about it. At the senior level, all 4. But the routing on the flagged communication. She looked at Marsh. Marsh said, "The deletion pattern on the copied messages tracks to access via the executive suite server partition. Graves, Cho, and Flores all have native permissions on that partition. Okonkwo has read access, but his upload permissions are restricted." "So Okonkwo is less likely," Nathan said, "unless he was working through one of the others." "Possible. But the communications show a single consistent sender pattern. This isn't 2 people coordinating. It's 1 person acting with enough confidence to do it alone." He looked at the notebook Victoria had open on the table. "The divorce, Cho's. When did it finalize?" "Approximately 5 months ago," Victoria said. "The flagged communication started 4 months ago." He said it without emphasis. Just placed it there. The table was quiet for a moment. Victoria looked at the notebook. Something moved through her face that was not satisfaction. It was more like the specific unhappiness of a person who has been handed an answer they didn't want to be true. "Sandra's been with the company for 7 years, she said. "People change their circumstances," Nathan said. "A bad financial year after a divorce, someone approaching with an offer that looked like a solution." He stopped. "I'm not certain. I'm giving you the most logical reading of what you've shown me. You'd know better than I would whether it fits the person." Victoria pressed her fingers briefly to the bridge of her nose. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "What do we do with it?" "Nothing yet. If you confront her or change her access without understanding the full picture, Voss knows something broke on his end and he moves faster." Nathan looked at Marsh. "Can your team insert a false document into the Korea partition? Something that looks like a legitimate partnership amendment, but has a tell? A specific clause that doesn't appear in any other version?" Marsh looked at him steadily. "A canary trap. If the false version gets to Voss, you've confirmed your source without tipping your hand, and you've bought time." He paused. "But it needs to be clean. If Cho, or whoever it is, though, is working with someone experienced, they'll check the document against what they've seen before. It needs to be plausible in every detail except the one you're tracking." "Our legal team can draft it," Marsh said. 48 hours. "Make it 40, Nathan said. "Based on what Doyle's inquiry tells us, Voss is assessing something. When he gets the answer back, he may move. He may move." Victoria had been watching him through all of this. There was an expression on her face he'd caught twice now, not during the professional parts of the conversation, but in the margins between them, the moments where he'd said something and she'd taken a half-second longer to respond than the sentence required. He didn't ask about it. He had his own sense of what it was, and this was not the moment. "There's one more thing," Marsh said. He reached into his jacket and put a folded page on the table. Nathan opened it. Another photograph, cleaner than the parking structure images, taken with a better lens, recent light. It showed a man Nathan hadn't seen before, walking into a building with a glass front. Mid-50s, silver hair, dressed expensively. The composure of someone who considered every public space a stage. "Harlan Voss," Marsh said. Nathan looked at the photograph for a long moment, memorized the face with the automatic thoroughness of long practice, noted the posture, the gait as captured in the motion of the image, the slight angle of the head that spoke to a man who didn't expect to be approached from the left. "Where was this taken?" he said. 11 days ago, the Meridian Club on 5th. Marsh paused. "He's been seen there 3 times in the past month. He's meeting someone, but we haven't been able to get a visual on the other party." Nathan set the photograph down. "The other party is probably Doyle," he said, "or someone Doyle uses as a relay. He doesn't meet clients directly in visible locations." He pushed the photograph back. "I want a copy of this too." "I'll have Marcus," Victoria started. "Not Marcus this time. Fewer people." He looked at Marsh. "Can you do it yourself?" Marsh nodded once. They stayed at the table another 30 minutes, working through logistics, communication protocols, what Marsh's team would and wouldn't log, what Nathan's actual role in this would look like in practice. He was clear about his limits, and Marsh was clear about his, and Victoria sat between them and managed the gap between what the situation needed and what both men were willing to give, with a precision that told Nathan she'd been brokering difficult negotiations her entire professional life. She was good at it. He noticed that without meaning to. They left the restaurant in separate intervals. Victoria first, then Marsh, then Nathan, after a 10-minute lag. He walked to his truck 2 blocks away, unlocked it, and sat for a moment without starting the engine. Doyle had a surface package on him, which meant within the next week, probably less, Doyle would run the second layer. Financials, extended background, potentially field surveillance. If Doyle was thorough, and he was thorough, he'd find the gaps in Nathan's history that Nathan had carefully maintained as gaps. Periods between employment records, an address history that was clean but thin. A man who had materialized into civilian life 4 years ago with a child and a work history that checked out technically, but that someone who knew what they were looking at would read for what it was. Doyle knew what he was looking at. And when Doyle brought that picture back to Voss, Voss would understand that the man from the grocery store was not a variable he could ignore or manage around. He was a variable that required a direct response. Nathan started the truck. He drove home through the city that had been quietly rearranging itself around him for the past 72 hours. The streets were the same. The lights were the same. The route he took past the elementary school and the Willow Street Community Center and the Korean grocery on the corner of Teller was unchanged, was exactly what it always was the specific topography of the life he had built. He pulled into the lot and sat for a moment. Upstairs, Emma would be winding down with Mrs. Patel, probably negotiating one more episode of something before bed. She had a soccer game Saturday morning. She had the school play in December. She'd been cast as a tree, which she had reported with enormous seriousness, as though trees were the most demanding dramatic role available. She had the dog drawing above her desk, and the landscape made of blue and green paint, and a geometry test coming up that she hadn't told him about, but that he'd seen the study sheet for in her backpack. He had built this. He was not going to let someone dismantle it from a distance, with contractors and leak operations and patients, and a man who made a living knowing things about people. He got out of the truck and went upstairs. Mrs. Patel was at the door before he knocked, coat already on, teacup in hand. "She's in bed, Ed," she said. "We compromised on 2 episodes and a chapter of the book." "Thank you," he said. "She's a good girl." Mrs. Patel patted his arm on the way out, the brief and sincere gesture of someone who said what she meant and left it at that. "You look tired." "I'm fine." "You look tired," she said again, with the placid certainty of a woman who had raised 3 children and recognized the specific exhaustion of someone carrying something they hadn't told anyone about. She didn't ask. She just went back across the hall and closed her door. Nathan went to Emma's room and looked in. She was asleep, genuinely this time, not the half-awake version of earlier in the week. The dog drawing was still above the desk. The cardboard landscape was propped against the wall below it, the blue and green still vivid and slightly smeared at one edge where she must have put her hand through it. He stood in the doorway for a while. Then he went to the kitchen table and opened his laptop and started writing down everything he knew and everything he suspected and the shape of what was coming in the spare, plain language of a man who had learned to be honest with himself on paper because it was the only place the accounting was reliable. He wrote for an hour. Then he closed the laptop and went to bed, and this time he didn't sleep at all. Pryor came back in 19 hours, not 24. That alone told Nathan something. Pryor was a man who quoted timelines the way contractors quoted budgets, with deliberate padding, because delivering early was a form of leverage and delivering late was a form of apology. When he came back fast, it meant the information had been easy to find, which meant the information was already in circulation, which meant it wasn't being held close. The message came through the encrypted app at 4:47 in the morning. Nathan was awake. He'd been awake since 2:15, lying on his back in the dark, with the ceiling and his own thoughts for company, and had given up somewhere around 4 and gone to the kitchen to make coffee. He didn't need on top of the coffee he'd already had. He read Pryor's message standing at the counter. Doyle had filed a second inquiry. Not a surface package this time. Full background, financials, extended history, any flags in private security databases. Filed 31 hours ago, which placed it approximately 18 hours after the first inquiry and about 12 hours after whatever Doyle had learned from the grocery store arrests. The custody processing had been public record. The names of everyone who gave statements had been accessible through the precinct's standard release. Nathan had known this when he sat across from Rourke and signed the form. He'd accepted it as an unavoidable cost. The second layer of a Doyle background typically returned results in 72 hours, which meant Doyle had a picture of Nathan Cole, the full picture, or as full as Doyle could assemble from the outside, in approximately 41 hours from right now. Nathan put his phone down on the counter. 41 hours. He thought about what Doyle would find. The employment records were clean. Caldwell Center had 3 years of solid documentation, and before that a brief stretch doing contract facilities work in 2 other buildings. And before that a period of military service that was technically accurate and also technically designed to be the end of the trail. The discharge papers listed him as a Navy veteran, rank and service period consistent with an honorable separation, and said nothing else because the nothing else was the point. The unit designation, the actual nature of his service, the 11 years of operations that had happened under structures that didn't generate discoverable paperwork. None of that was in any file a private contractor could reach. But Doyle was experienced. He'd worked adjacent to those structures long enough to know what their absence looked like. A military record that ended cleanly with an honorable discharge and then produced a civilian who moved the way Nathan moved, who responded the way Nathan responded, who had handled 3 armed men in a grocery store and come out of it without a tremor. Doyle would read that absence the way a doctor reads a gap in an X-ray. Not as nothing, as a shape. He'd know what Nathan was, even without knowing who. The question was what Voss would do with that knowledge. Nathan called Marsh at 5:15. The phone rang 4 times, and then Marsh picked up with the voice of a man who slept light and was already mostly functional. Cole. Doyle filed a second inquiry on me 31 hours ago. Full background. He'll have results in about 40 hours. A brief pause. He could hear Marsh processing. Which puts us on a compressed timeline. The Canary document. Where are we? Legal finished a draft last night. I was going to review it this morning. Marsh's voice was even, but Nathan could hear the adjustment happening in real time. The mental shift from the schedule he'd planned to the schedule that now existed. I can have it in the partition by noon. Move it up. Get it in by 9. If Doyle comes back to Voss with a full picture on me, Voss isn't going to wait. He'll want to understand all his variables before he makes his next move, and I'm now one of them. Nathan set his coffee mug down. Has anything changed on the surveillance around the company? We had 2 vehicles do a slow pass of the Meridian building yesterday. Neither registered to anything traceable. I flagged them for pattern. They're establishing a perimeter picture. They want to know Victoria's movement schedule. He thought about the next piece. Does she have anything on her calendar that takes her off campus this week? Thursday. She has a site visit at our data center on the east side. It's been on the calendar for 3 weeks. Not publicly listed, but accessible to anyone with internal schedule permissions. Cancel it. She won't like that. She'll like the alternative less. He paused. Tell her I'll explain when I see her. Can you set something up for this afternoon? Same protocol as Lassiter's. I'll text you a location by 10. Nathan ended the call and stood in the kitchen while the city outside started its slow morning process of becoming itself again. A truck moving down Teller Street. The neighbor across the alley whose alarm went off at 5:30 every morning and who had apparently never once successfully woken up at 5:30. The specific amber quality of the light before it turned fully gray. He went and showered and dressed and made Emma's lunch, peanut butter and sliced apple and a handful of crackers, and one of the small juice boxes she preferred to the larger ones for reasons she'd never explained, and had it packed and in the refrigerator before she woke up at 6:42, padding out to the kitchen in her socks with her hair at an angle that defied straightforward geometry. "Morning," he said. She said, which was her standard opening. She climbed onto a kitchen chair and put her head down on the table. He put cereal in front of her. The tiger box. She'd made him go back to Granger's the previous Saturday with a focus that suggested she held grudges professionally. She ate without lifting her head fully, which he had decided over 7 years of mornings was a genuine talent. He made his own breakfast standing at the counter, and they existed in the comfortable quiet of two people who knew each other well enough to not need to fill every silence. "I have soccer Saturday," she said eventually. "I know. You're coming. I'll be there. Last time you were on your phone the whole time." He looked at her. "I watched you score. You watched me from your phone." I looked up. She gave him. His mother used to give his father when he said something technically true in a way that everyone present understood was also substantively false. The genetics of that expression across 2 generations was something Nathan tried not to think about too carefully. "I want you to actually watch," she said. "Not be there and watch. Actually watch." "Okay," he said. She seemed satisfied. She finished the cereal. He drove her to school. In the drop-off line, he did not sit in the truck afterward. He got out and walked the immediate perimeter of the block in a way that would look to any observer like a man checking his phone while his kid went inside. 3 minutes, standard loop. He was looking for vehicles that had been there yesterday, looking for anyone positioned in a way that prioritized sightlines over parking convenience, looking for the particular stillness of someone who is watching rather than passing through. He found nothing conclusive. A sedan parked on the east side that he hadn't noticed before, but it was occupied by a woman reading something on a tablet and dressed in the specific exhausted manner of a school parent who had dropped her own kid and was now decompressing before driving to work. He noted it and moved on. He drove to the Caldwell Center and worked through the morning on a drainage issue in the second-floor restrooms that turned out to be more involved than the initial call suggested. A partial blockage 50 feet into the outflow line that required renting a snake from the building's maintenance vendor account and 2 hours in the utility corridor. He was covered in the particular variety of grime that drain work produced by 10:30 and had Deb laughing at his expression when he came back through the service entrance. "Told you it was the outflow," she said. "You told me it was the fixture," he said. "I told you to check the outflow first." "You told me to check the fixture first, and then if that didn't fix it, to check the outflow." Deb considered this. "I may have been wrong about the order." "You may have been." He pulled his jacket off. "I need the vendor account to get a pipe inspection camera for Thursday. Same line, further down." "I'll call them." She turned back to her desk. "You have a message. Woman called the main line, said she was a colleague of yours, left a number." Nathan stopped. "What name?" Deb looked at the notepad. "Victoria." He took the notepad. The number was not the encrypted line. It was a different number, one he didn't have. He thought about that for a moment, then thought about the fact that she'd called the building's main line rather than the app, which meant either she couldn't reach him on the app or something had happened that moved faster than the app felt adequate for. He called from the stairwell. She picked up on the first ring. "Sandra Cho resigned this morning," she said. Her voice was controlled, but there was something running underneath it, the way current runs under ice. She submitted the letter at 7:48. No explanation beyond personal reasons. She was out of the building by 8:30. Nathan leaned against the stairwell wall. "Did she take anything?" "Her personal items. Our security team did a sweep. Nothing from the company servers, nothing physical from her office files. She was clean on the way out." "She knew," he said. "The Canary document?" "No. Marsh said it went in the partition at 9. Cho was out at 8:30. She didn't trigger on the document." He thought through it. "Someone warned her, Between last night and this morning, she got word that the operation was compromised or changing direction. She was told to clean out. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Which means Voss knows we know. Or suspects. The resignation is a tell. If she'd been acting alone and panicked, she would have done something messier. This was coordinated. Someone told her it was time to step back from the exposure. He pushed off the wall. Is Marsh with you? He's in my office. Keep the Thursday site visit canceled. Don't put anything new on your external calendar, and I need you to do something that's going to feel counterintuitive. What? Act normal. Go to your scheduled internal meetings. Be visible inside the building. Don't let anyone in your executive team see that anything has changed. He paused. If Voss thinks the leak is blown and his intelligence picture on me is incomplete, he's going to want to force a resolution before his leverage window closes. The Korea deal is in 3 weeks. If he can't use the internal leak anymore, he has to try something more direct. More direct, she repeated. Not a question. The weight of what that meant was already in her voice. I need Marsh to give me everything on Voss's movement patterns for the past 2 weeks. Where he goes, what time, who he travels with. Nathan checked his watch. Can you still do this afternoon? Yes. Same protocol. Marsh texts me the location. He stopped. Victoria. Yes. You're doing fine, he said. He hadn't planned to say it. It came out with more directness than he'd intended, and there was a half-second of silence on the line that had a texture he didn't try to interpret. I'll see you this afternoon. He went back to work. The afternoon meeting was at a coffee shop in a neighborhood neither of them regularly used, far enough from the Meridian building and the Caldwell Center that the coincidence of their presence was implausible. Marsh had the movement report already prepared, printed, not digital, which Nathan had specifically requested, and which told him Marsh was taking the operational security seriously enough to inconvenience himself. Voss's pattern was consistent with a man who considered himself untouchable by conventional monitoring. He moved through public spaces without counter-surveillance habits. No route variation, no doubles back, no position checking. He'd been at the Meridian Club 4 times in 2 weeks. He had a residence in the north part of the city and a secondary property, an older industrial facility 40 minutes outside the city limits that had been converted to private use approximately 8 months ago, and that the county records listed vaguely as a consulting firm's operational space. Nathan looked at the industrial property address for a long time. What's the conversion record show, he said. Structural modifications, security system permits, backup power installation, Marsh said. It's set up like a secure facility, private road access, perimeter fencing added in July. That's not a consulting space, Nathan said. That's where he runs the operation from. That's what I thought, Marsh said, but we have no legitimate grounds to surveil it. If I send my team and we're spotted, it tips everything. I'm not suggesting you send your team, Nathan looked at Victoria. Does Voss know what I look like? Marsh answered before she could. Doyle's inquiry included a request for a photograph. The registry confirmed the request, but the image associated with your driver's license would have been returned, standard portrait. So he has a face. Nathan nodded slowly. Which means I can't go near the facility without assuming he has people watching for me. But I can get eyes on the approach. He turned the movement report over. Has he used the facility in the last week? Twice, Marsh said. Monday and Wednesday. Both times he arrived late afternoon and left within 2 hours. Pattern day would be Friday, Nathan said. Tomorrow. You're going to surveil the facility, Marsh said. It wasn't quite a question. I'm going to know what I'm dealing with before he decides to bring the problem to my street. He said it plainly, without drama. What I need from you is a vehicle. Not one of your company fleet, something untraceable to Sterling Tech or to me, and a working radio frequency for the local county emergency dispatch, so I know what their response time looks like out there. Marsh looked at him for a moment with the expression of a man deciding how much professional discomfort he was willing to absorb. I can have a vehicle at a lot on Crane Street by 7 tomorrow morning. Keys where? Left rear wheel well. Nathan nodded. Victoria had been quiet through most of this. She was watching him with an expression he'd noticed before, and still hadn't found a clean name for. It wasn't admiration, and it wasn't fear, and it wasn't the calculating assessment of a CEO evaluating an asset. It was something more unguarded than any of those things, and it appeared at the moments when he was being most straightforwardly himself. Not the maintenance worker performance, not the careful civilian construct, but the part of him that had spent 11 years learning to think clearly in rooms that were on fire. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Go ahead." "When you went back into that store, at Granger's." She held his eyes. "Emma was in the back room. You'd already sent her somewhere safe. You could have stayed with her." He knew where this was going. "Yes." "But you went back out." "Sophie was at the register," he said. "The manager was about to walk into something he didn't understand." "That's what you told Rourke." "It's what happened." "I know it's what happened," she said. "I'm asking why. Because there are a lot of people who could give the same factual account of a situation and still not walk back toward it." She paused. "You were a father first and all of that, and you still went back out." He thought about how to answer that honestly. He'd thought about it before, in his own accounting, but he hadn't put it into words for another person, and putting things into words changed them in ways he was cautious about. "Because doing nothing is also a choice," he said. "And I've been in enough situations to understand that when someone gets hurt because nobody acted, the people who could have acted carry that, whether they know it consciously or not." He paused. "I didn't want to carry Sophie." Victoria looked at him. Then she looked down at the table. Whatever she was thinking, she kept it there for now. Marsh cleared his throat with the professional timing of a man who understood when to move a room along. "We should talk about what happens if Voss accelerates before tomorrow." "He won't move tonight," Nathan said. "He's waiting on Doyle's background report. He wants a complete picture before he acts." "That's how he thinks. You can see it in every phase of what he's done so far. Patient, methodical, staged." He looked at Marsh. "Which means we have tonight and tomorrow morning, but not much more than that." They finished the meeting in 40 minutes. Nathan left first, walked 2 blocks to where he'd parked, and drove to pick up Emma from the community center. She had made a self-portrait in today's art class. Her own face, painted in shades of orange and purple, with what appeared to be a crown of indeterminate meaning above the head. He looked at it for a long moment when she showed it to him. "That's very good," he said. "I know," she said, with the breezy self-assurance of someone who had not yet learned to second-guess herself, and he hoped privately would take a long time to learn. She tucked it under her arm. "Can we get food from the Thai place?" "Mrs. Ramsey has her car in my spot again." "That's not an answer to what I asked." "Yes," he said. "We can get Thai food." They ate at the kitchen table with the containers spread out, and Emma narrating something that had happened at school involving 2 of her friends and a disagreement about the rules of a game he'd never heard of. And he listened and asked questions and ate his noodles and was, for that hour, completely present in the way that he could manage when he deliberately put everything else down. After she was in bed, asleep by 9, worn out by the community center and the food and the sheer accumulated energy expenditure of being 7, he went back to the kitchen table and spread out the facility information Marsh had provided. The industrial property sat on 12 acres, single-access road, visible from the county route for about 400 meters before it bent into tree cover. The facility itself, an old machine works that had been retrofitted, was set back approximately 300 meters from the road. The security modifications included fencing and what the permit application described as a monitored perimeter system, which in Nathan's reading meant cameras and possibly motion sensors, but probably not staffed patrol, since staffed patrol would have required personnel filings that didn't appear in the county records. There was a secondary track, a service road that appeared on older county maps and had not been included in the recent property filings, which either meant it had been closed and was no longer usable, or meant it had been overlooked. If it was still passable, it approached the property from the east rather than the main road, through a section of mixed forest and scrubland that would provide cover for a vehicle. He'd know when he was there. He also needed to think about what he would do if tomorrow went wrong. He hadn't allowed himself to think carefully about that until now, because until now the sequence of things had been moving fast enough that getting ahead of himself was its own kind of risk. But sitting in the kitchen at 10:30 with Emma asleep down the hall and the facility map in front of him, he made himself think through it. If Voss moved faster than anticipated, if Doyle's report came back early, or if the Cho resignation had accelerated Voss's timeline in ways Nathan couldn't predict, there were 2 likely targets. Victoria, because she was the obstacle between Voss and what he wanted, and Nathan himself, because he had become a variable Voss couldn't account for, and experienced operators didn't leave unaccounted variables in the field. For Victoria, Marsh had the coverage. The Meridian building was monitored. Her residents had a security team. She was, within those constraints, protected. For Nathan, the vulnerability was simple, and he'd known it since the first night. It wasn't him. He could manage a direct threat to himself with the tools available to him. The vulnerability was the apartment on Teller Street and a 7-year-old who attended Carver Elementary at 7:52 every morning and who had soccer Saturday and a school play in December and a drawing of an imaginary dog taped above her desk. He picked up his phone and called a number he hadn't used in 2 years. It rang 5 times. Then a woman's voice, groggy with sleep and immediately sharpened by the hour and the number. "Nathan." "Claire," he said. "I'm sorry for the hour." Claire Delaney had been his team's intelligence analyst for the last 3 years of his service. She'd left the work before he did, and had moved to a small city 4 hours north and become, improbably, a high school librarian. They spoke occasionally, not often, with the comfort of people who understood each other's silences. "What's wrong?" she said. "Nothing yet, but I'm in the middle of something and I need a contingency." He kept his voice low, even though Emma's room was down the hall and the door was closed. "If I call you in the next 36 hours and say I need you to be able to take Emma for a few days. Not here, up there." A pause. Not surprised exactly. More like a person who has always known a call like this was possible and has made a quiet internal peace with it. "Does she know me?" "I've told her about you. She'd come without a problem if I told her to." "Okay," Claire said, simply and without condition. "I'm here." "It won't come to that," he said. "You're calling me at 10:30 to set it up," she said. "So maybe." He didn't have a good answer for that. "I'll call you tomorrow evening either way." "Nathan." Her voice went quieter. "Are you okay?" He thought about the honest answer to that. He was tired in a way that wasn't fixed by sleep. He was running on professional reflex and competence, and the particular kind of sustained focus that he was good at, and that took something out of him every time he used it. He was sitting in a kitchen in an apartment he'd chosen for its unremarkableness and its distance from everything that was now sitting at his kitchen table with him. "I'm handling it," he said. "That's not what I asked." "I know." He looked at the facility map. "I'm okay, Claire. I'll call tomorrow." He ended the call and sat with the map for another hour, memorizing the access routes, building a picture of the property in his mind the way he used to build pictures before going somewhere new. The known features, the probable layout, the variables he couldn't confirm until he was on the ground. At 11:45, he folded the map, put it in his jacket, and went to bed. He set an alarm for 5 a.m. He didn't need it. He was awake at 4:48, already thinking. He dressed in dark, nondescript clothes, the kind that weren't tactical in any visible way, just functional. Dark jeans, a worn navy work jacket, boots with good grip and no marking. He made coffee and drank it at the counter in the dark and went over the day's sequence in his head. Drop Emma at school. Drive to Crane Street. Collect the vehicle. Take the county route south and east toward the facility, arriving well before any reasonable expectation of Voss being present. Establish a position that gave him sight on the access road, and ideally on the eastern service track. Observe. Confirm what was there. Come back with information that made the next decision possible. Simple. It was supposed to be simple. He drove Emma to school at 7:52. She had her backpack and her lunch and her jacket half-zipped despite the cold, which was a small and consistent battle he had learned to lose graciously. At the drop-off door, she turned back and looked at him. "Saturday," she said. "Actually watching." "I know," he said. She went inside. He sat in the truck for exactly 4 minutes, running the perimeter check with his eyes while appearing to check his phone. The sedan from yesterday was gone. Nothing in its place that concerned him. He pulled out and drove toward Crane Street. The vehicle Marsh had arranged was a 10-year-old gray Civic with clean plates registered to a property management company that was 2 holding layers away from anything connected to Sterling Tech. Nathan found the keys in the wheel well, drove it around the block once to confirm the handling, and headed south. The county route took 42 minutes at a deliberate, speed law-observing pace. He picked up the service track turnoff from the older map reading. It was still there, partially grown over but passable for a low-clearance vehicle with care. He took the Civic in 40 meters and parked it off the track in a gap in the tree line that broke the sight angle from the main road. He walked the rest of the way. The facility was larger than the permit documents suggested. The main building was a long, low structure with a newer roof and what looked like an HVAC retrofit along the east wall. The kind of climate control you'd install if you were running servers or if you wanted to maintain a specific environment inside a space. The perimeter fencing was chain link topped with concertina, which was serious but not elaborate. 4 cameras visible on the building corners. Probably 2 more he couldn't see covering the approach angles. The main gate was closed. No vehicles inside the fence. He settled into a position in the tree line with a sight line on both the main gate and the eastern face of the building. He was far enough from the camera range to be outside the practical resolution of whatever they were running. He settled his breathing, adjusted his position against the tree at his back, and waited. At 11:41, a dark SUV came up the main access road. It stopped at the gate. A man got out to open it, not the driver, a second person. And Nathan used the time of the gate opening to study the driver through his binoculars. The angle wasn't perfect. He got a partial profile. It was enough. Harlan Voss stepped out of the SUV at 11:49 and walked into the facility like a man entering his own house, because in the way that mattered, it was. Behind him, from the passenger side, came a figure Nathan recognized from the parking structure photograph. Carver Doyle. They were together, which meant Doyle had delivered his report in person, not through a relay, which meant the report was ready, which meant Voss now had whatever picture of Nathan Cole existed in the files and databases that Doyle could reach, and they were here to decide what to do about it. Nathan adjusted his position by 6 inches and kept watching. A third man came out of the facility to meet them at the entrance, someone who had already been inside. Nathan couldn't place him from this distance. Late 40s, heavy build, moved with the particular ease of a man who was comfortable being the largest person in a room. The 3 of them stood at the facility entrance and spoke for approximately 4 minutes. Nathan was too far away to hear. He watched the body language instead. Voss was doing most of the talking. Doyle was listening with the stillness of a man receiving a decision rather than making one. The third man, whoever he was, nodded twice and looked toward the gate, which was the direction of the main road, which was the direction of the city. Then Voss pointed toward the road and said something, and Doyle nodded once, firmly, and that was the specific exchange that told Nathan everything he needed to know about the next 12 hours. I was out of the tree line and moving back toward the Civic in 60 seconds. He reached the car, started it, and drove back toward the county route at an unhurried pace that was controlled rather than slow. His hands were steady on the wheel. He had learned a long time ago that the time to be afraid was not when you understood a threat clearly. Fear was for ambiguity, for the thing you hadn't seen yet. Clarity was different. Clarity was actually the easier condition to operate from because it removed the energy cost of uncertainty. He called Marsh from the car, keeping it brief. Voss and Doyle met at the facility at 11:45. They have the report. Decision was made on site. Doyle received direction, and it was pointed toward the city. You need to increase coverage on Victoria now, not this evening. Understood, Marsh said immediately, the response of someone who had been waiting for a call and knew what to do with it. Are you coming in? Not directly. Nathan checked his mirror. Nothing behind him. I need to make one stop. I'll be at the Meridian building by 2. He ended the call and drove. The stop was Carver Elementary. He didn't go to the front entrance. He parked across the street and called the school's main office from his cell phone, and when the secretary picked up, he said he was Nathan Cole, Emma's father, and that he needed to add a name to the approved pickup list for the next 3 days. Of course, the secretary said. What's the name? Claire Delaney, he said. He spelled it. She may come as early as this afternoon. If she does, please call me before releasing Emma to her. I'll confirm by phone. We'll note that. Is there anything else? No, he said. Thank you. He sat across from the school for a moment after the call. The building looked like it always looked. The faded brick, the painted mural on the east wall that the third graders had done last spring, the 2 big oak trees by the front entrance that Emma sometimes climbed the lower branches of when she thought no one was watching. Ordinary and specific and hers. He pulled out and drove toward the city. At 1:15, his encrypted app buzzed with a message from Marsh. Voss has a registered associate, Roy Brecker, former private security, known to use coercive methods. Third man from your facility report matches his profile. He just pinged on a traffic camera 8 miles from your building. Nathan read the message once and put the phone in his jacket. 8 miles. 40 minutes in city traffic, maybe less. He pressed the accelerator down and moved through the city with the focus of a man who had run out of time for anything except what came next. He called Claire Delaney. She picked up on the second ring. "It's today," he said. "Can you be in the city by 3?" A pause, then, without drama, "I'm already in my car." He felt something shift in his chest that wasn't quite relief because relief implied the danger had passed. And it hadn't, but it was the closest available thing. "Claire, she's going to be fine," Claire said. "Focus on what you're doing." He did. Brecker reached the Meridian building at 2:47. Nathan knew this because he was already in the lobby when the man came through the front entrance and because he had positioned himself near the building directory with his back to the wall and a direct sightline to every point of entry. And because Roy Brecker was exactly the kind of man who didn't try to be invisible. Large, deliberate, with the particular confidence of someone who had spent a career using his physical presence as the opening statement of every interaction. He was alone, which told Nathan something. Either Voss was confident one man was sufficient, or Brecker was the advance, coming in to assess, to locate, to establish position before whatever came next. Nathan read the body language as he watched Brecker approach the reception desk. The man wasn't rushing. He wasn't scanning the room with the active eyes of someone expecting resistance. He was moving like a person on a scheduled appointment, which meant he was here under a pretext, which meant he'd done some groundwork on the building layout and had a reason ready. Nathan pulled out his phone and sent a single word to Marsh's encrypted line, "Lobby." He didn't wait for a response. He walked toward the elevator bank on the far side of the lobby, keeping Brecker in his peripheral vision. At the desk, Brecker was showing something to the receptionist, an ID of some kind, or a card. The receptionist was nodding, reaching for the visitor log. So he had a pretext. A meeting, probably. A false appointment with someone on an upper floor, enough to get him a visitor badge and elevator access. It was a straightforward infiltration of the kind that worked in commercial buildings, because commercial buildings were designed for access, not security, and the people staffing their lobbies were trained for customer service, not threat assessment. Nathan stepped into an elevator and pressed 12, one floor above Victoria's suite on 11, and rode up with his hands loose and his mind moving through what the next minutes would require. Marsh was already on 11 when Nathan came down the stairwell. He was standing outside Victoria's suite with 2 men Nathan recognized from the building security brief. Ex-law enforcement, both of them, solid and experienced. Marsh had his phone in his hand and the expression of a man who had stopped being surprised by anything, but was still capable of being annoyed by the timing. "He's on his way up," Marsh said. "I know, he used a pretext at the desk." Nathan looked at the suite door. "Is she inside?" "Yes, we moved her back from the window when you texted." "Good." Nathan thought through it fast. "Don't intercept him in the elevator or the hallway. Let him come to the door." Marsh looked at him. "Why?" "Because if you take him in the hallway, his lawyer calls it overzealous security, and Voss has nothing connecting him to it. If he comes to the door and I'm here, I want him to see me. I want him to go back and tell Voss exactly what he saw." He paused. "This ends tonight, but it ends properly. Not with Brecker in an elevator with a sprained wrist." Marsh studied him for a moment. Then, "My guys stay in position." "That's fine." "And the moment he does anything physical—" "He won't," Nathan said. "Not here. He's assessing." He looked at the suite door. "Let me in." Victoria was standing by her desk when he came in. Not sitting, not pacing, but standing in the middle of her own office with her arms crossed and the look of a person who has been told to stay put and is using every remaining piece of discipline to do so. She looked at him when he entered, and something in her face reorganized itself, not into relief exactly, but into the more functional state that comes when a person who has been alone with a bad thing finally has someone else in the room with them. "He's coming up?" she said. "He's coming up." Nathan looked around the office. It was large. The corner suite had floor-to-ceiling glass on 2 walls, a conference table, a seating area near the door. He positioned himself beside the door frame, not directly in the entrance, but off to the side, in the angle that a person approaching from the hallway wouldn't see until they were already inside. "What are you going to do?" Victoria asked. Talk to him. She stared at him. That's it? That's the first thing. He met her eyes. Trust me. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she uncrossed her arms and went to sit behind her desk, which was the right instinct. It put her in a position of authority in her own space, rather than in the posture of someone who had been frightened into a corner. He appreciated the instinct without saying so. They waited 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Nathan counted them. The door opened. Brecker came in with the ease of a man who had been told the occupant was expecting someone else and hadn't been told otherwise, and he'd made it 3 steps into the office before he registered Nathan standing beside the doorframe. He stopped. The two men looked at each other. Up close, Brecker was exactly what his reputation suggested. Big, composed, with small, intelligent eyes that were doing a rapid recalculation behind an expression that revealed nothing of it. He looked at Nathan for 4 full seconds, the way you look at something that has complicated your understanding of a room. Mr. Cole, he said. He said it the way people say a name when they're confirming an identification, not making an introduction. Mr. Brecker, Nathan said. A brief pause. Brecker glanced at Victoria, then back. I have a meeting scheduled with... You don't, Nathan said. The name you gave at the desk doesn't work here anymore. HR processed the termination last week. He said it calmly, as a piece of information rather than a challenge. But that's not actually why you're here. Brecker was quiet for a moment. The recalculation was still happening behind the composed face. Nathan could see it. The man was good, experienced, and he was doing the same arithmetic Nathan would have done in his position. What did the person across from him actually know? How much of the operation was exposed? Whether the correct move was to continue the pretext, withdraw, or escalate? Nathan made the decision easier for him. Doyle's background report on me came back this morning, Nathan said. I'm guessing it didn't tell Voss as much as he was hoping for. Gaps in the record. Service history that checks out technically, but doesn't add up to the man from the grocery store. He watched Brecker's face. So Voss sent you to get a look, to see whether I was worth the problem or whether he could manage around me. He paused. He can't. And I need you to go back and tell him that. Brecker looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in the small eyes. Not fear, but the recalibrated assessment of a professional who has updated his estimate of a situation. You're not what the file says. The file is accurate as far as it goes. It doesn't go far enough. No, Nathan agreed. It doesn't. Brecker was quiet again. He looked once more at Victoria, who was sitting behind her desk with her hands flat on the surface and her expression composed, and then back at Nathan. Whatever he was reading in the room, in Nathan specifically, in the way Nathan was standing, in the absence of any performance in any of it, appeared to settle something. You know this doesn't end here, Brecker said. Whatever you think you have. What I have, Nathan said, is everything Doyle delivered to Voss in the past 8 months, routed through a cutout that Doyle himself established, and that we've been tracking for 3 weeks. What I have is the communication chain that connects Voss's operation to Sandra Cho, including the instruction she received this morning to resign. What I have is a facility on County Road 14 that was used for operational planning, with entry and exit logs that establish a pattern. He let that settle. And what I have is a photograph of Voss and Doyle together at that facility, taken this morning at 11:49. He watched Brecker absorb all of this. The man's jaw was tight. He was a professional, and professionals didn't react visibly to bad news. But there was a compression in his posture that told Nathan the information had landed. You were there this morning, Brecker said. I was. And you didn't bring law enforcement? Not yet. Nathan held his eyes. That's the conversation I'm asking you to take back to Voss. He has one option that doesn't end with federal conspiracy charges and the destruction of everything he's spent 30 years building. He walks away from Sterling Tech completely and permanently. No board intervention, no secondary action, no further contact with anyone in this company. He dissolves the operational structure, Doyle, Brecker, the facility, all of it, and he does it in a way that's verifiable. He paused. If he does that, the evidence package we have doesn't go to the authorities. It goes into a secure hold, and it stays there as long as the terms hold. Brecker stared at him. That's not an offer that usually comes from a maintenance supervisor. No, Nathan said. It's not. Another silence. Brecker looked at the floor for a moment. A rare break in the composed exterior. The tell of a man who is genuinely uncertain, which in Nathan's experience was a more productive state than either confidence or fear. Then he looked up. "I'll deliver the message," he said. "I'm not speaking for Voss's answer." "I know, that's all I'm asking." Brecker turned and walked back through the door. His footsteps in the hallway were measured, unhurried. The elevator opened and closed. Nathan waited until the sound was fully gone. Then he exhaled through his nose, a long, controlled breath, the kind that dissipates something that has been held in the body for too long. From behind her desk, Victoria said, "That was everything we have on him?" "Not everything, but enough that if Doyle is as experienced as he is, he'll advise Voss that the exposure is real." Nathan turned from the door. "Voss is methodical. He built this operation carefully and patiently because he doesn't like losing control of situations. Offering him a controlled exit is the only thing that has a chance of landing. If he thinks he's cornered with no option, he gets dangerous." Victoria looked at him. "And if he doesn't take it? Then we go to the authorities with what we have and it gets messy and public and probably takes a year in court." He came to the chair across from her desk and sat down, which was the first time he'd sat down in the past 2 hours, and his body registered it with a gratitude he didn't let show. "I'd rather he takes it." "So would I." She was quiet for a moment. "The photograph from this morning, you were actually out there." "Yes." "Alone?" "Yes." She looked at him with the expression that he had noticed and still hadn't named, and this time she didn't look away from it. "Nathan, why didn't you tell me you were going? I could have—" "There wasn't anything you could have done," he said, "and I needed to know what I was dealing with before I could tell you anything useful about it." He met her eyes. "I wasn't being heroic. I was being practical." "I know the difference," she said quietly. "That's not what I was going to say." He waited. "I was going to say I could have been worried about someone specific instead of just generally terrified." Her voice was direct but not without cost, the kind of directness that has had to get past something on the way out. "There's a difference." He held her gaze. Something in the room changed in the quiet way that rooms change when two people have stopped pretending they're not having the conversation they're actually having. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry." She nodded once, accepting it. Then she looked at her desk, at the files and the laptop, and the stack of papers that represented a company that had spent the past week under siege, and she said, "What do we do now?" "We wait," he said. "And you try to do some of your actual job while we wait, because Voss will be watching to see if anything changes. If the company looks normal, it tells him the offer is genuine." He paused. "And I need to make a phone call." He stepped out to the hallway and called Claire. She picked up on the first ring. "How bad?" "Manageable," he said. "Where are you?" "Carver Elementary." A pause. "Emma's in the office. She thinks we're going for ice cream." Something loosened in his chest that had been tight for the better part of 2 days. "Tell her we are. I'll be there in 40 minutes. "Are you actually okay?" He thought about what honest looked like from where he was standing. "Getting there," he said. "Thank you, Claire. I mean it." "I know you do." A brief silence. "She drew me a picture of a dog on the way over. Orange circle, 4 lines, very confident technique. She'll tell you his name is Biscuit." She already did. He could hear the smile in it. 40 minutes, Nathan." He went back inside and told Victoria he was leaving. She stood up from behind the desk. "I'll call you when Voss responds." "Marsh will call me. You should sleep tonight if you can." She gave him a look that said she found that advice simultaneously reasonable and unlikely to be followed, which he thought was a fair and accurate response to the circumstances. She walked around the desk and stopped in front of him with a few feet of space between them, and there was a moment where neither of them said anything, and the afternoon light came through the tall windows at a long angle, and the city made its constant ambient noise below and around them. "I don't know how to thank you for this," she said, "and I know that's an insufficient thing to say." "You don't need to thank me." "Nathan, I mean it. I was in a grocery store." He said it without irony. "The rest of it followed." She looked at him. "The rest of it followed because of who you are, not just what you can do." She said it plainly, without sentimentality, the way she said most things, with the directness of a person who had learned that the clearest path between what she meant and the person she was talking to was a straight line. Those are different things. He didn't argue with that. He let it stand. "I'll talk to you tomorrow," he said. He took the elevator down and walked through the lobby and out into the late afternoon air, which was cool and carrying the first edge of the coming winter. And he stood on the sidewalk for a moment outside the Meridian building and looked up at the sky, which was doing the specific thing autumn skies do in the late afternoon in this city, a pale gray fading to something that wasn't quite blue and wasn't quite gold at the western edge. Then he went to get his daughter. Emma was outside the school entrance with Claire when he pulled up, sitting on the front steps and working on what appeared to be a second drawing, this one of a house, rendered with the decisive architectural confidence of someone who had strong opinions about what a house should look like. Claire was sitting beside her with the patient ease of a person genuinely comfortable in the company of a child, which she always had been. Emma looked up when she saw the truck. She stood up and came down the steps and stopped in front of him, looking at his face with the focused attention she applied to things she was trying to read. "You look tired," she said. "I'm fine." "You look like how you looked the morning after the store thing." He crouched down to her level. "I'm okay, Em. I promise." She studied him for another second with those eyes that had been seen straight through him since she was 3 years old. Then she held up the drawing. "This is for you," she said. "It's our house. I put a dog in the yard." He took it, looked at it. There was indeed a dog in the yard. The same orange circle, 4 lines, 2 dots, though this time it was surrounded by an elaborate fence and what appeared to be a considerable quantity of flowers. "Biscuit," he said. "He lives with us now," she said. "In the picture." He folded the drawing carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. "Thank you." Claire caught his eye over Emma's head. The communication of 2 people who had been in enough difficult situations to have developed a shorthand for the ones they couldn't discuss in front of a child. She raised her eyebrows slightly. He gave a small nod. She understood, and her face settled. "I was promised ice cream," Emma said. "You were," Nathan said. He stood up. "Claire, will you join us?" Claire smiled, the first fully relaxed smile he'd seen on another person in about 72 hours. "I drove 4 hours for ice cream," she said. "Of course I'm joining you." They went to a place on Orchard Street that Emma had selected approximately 8 seconds after the suggestion was made, with the decisive clarity she brought to all food decisions. It was a small shop, family-run, with handwritten flavors on a chalkboard and mismatched chairs and a dog bowl of water by the front door that Emma commented on with significant approval. They sat at a corner table, and Emma ordered something involving 3 flavors and what she described as a necessary quantity of sprinkles, and Claire ordered coffee because she was 4 hours from home and had a long drive back, and Nathan ordered a single scoop of something plain and ate about half of it and spent the rest of the time watching Emma and Claire negotiate the question of whether Biscuit could theoretically also have ice cream if he were a real dog. "Dogs can't have chocolate," Emma said, with the authority of someone who had clearly researched this. "Some ice cream is dog-safe," Claire said. Emma considered this. "Vanilla. He could have vanilla." "That seems right. We'd have to get a separate bowl." Emma looked at Nathan. "We'd need a bowl like the one by the door." "We don't have a dog," Nathan said. "I know," she said. "I'm planning ahead." He looked at her. This small, specific person with her 3-flavor ice cream and her opinions about dogs and her dog drawings in her jacket pocket. This was what he had made of the last 4 years. This was what all the ordinary Thursdays and the bad coffee and the maintenance reports and the deliberately unremarkable life had been for. He thought about what she'd asked him in the truck after the grocery store. Why didn't you run? And what he'd told her. Because sometimes you're the one who can help. And when that's true, running is the same as doing the harm yourself. He believed that. He still believed it. But sitting in the ice cream shop in the late afternoon with Emma negotiating the logistics of a dog that didn't exist, and Claire quietly drinking her coffee, and the ordinary warmth of an ordinary room around them, he thought about the other half of that truth, the part he hadn't said, the part that went, and then you come back. You come back to the table, to the child, to the quiet room, and the predictable streets, and the life that looks unremarkable from the outside and is, from the inside, the most specific and irreplaceable thing you have. You go toward the hard thing when it is yours to go toward, and then you come back. And the coming back is not a failure of nerve or retreat. The coming back is the whole point. He had spent a long time thinking of his civilian life as something he'd chosen instead of his former life. A replacement. A surrender of one kind of identity in exchange for another. But sitting here, in this room, he understood that was the wrong frame. The two things weren't in opposition. The man who had walked toward the danger in the grocery store and the man sitting across from his 7-year-old in an ice cream shop were not different men in conflict. They were the same man, making the same choice from the same place, toward the thing that needed protecting and then back to the thing worth protecting. That was not a lesson he'd learned in any training. It was the kind of thing that only becomes clear in retrospect, which was, he supposed, how most of the important things worked. His phone buzzed. He looked at it under the table. A message from Marsh, 3 words. Voss agreed. Done. He put the phone back in his pocket. Emma was still talking about the dog bowl. Claire was asking the right questions to keep the conversation going in the way that people do when they're good at being present. The shop was warm and smelled like waffle cones, and the light outside through the front window was going the way it goes in late October. Fast, the whole sky shifting in the span of half an hour from gray to amber to the particular shade of dark that means winter is serious about arriving. Dad, Emma said. Yeah. After ice cream, can we go to Granger's? He looked at her. Why? We never got the cereal. He thought about Granger's, the cleaned-up registers and the new tape over the floor where evidence markers had been. Sophie back at her station maybe, or maybe not yet. The fluorescent lights in the bread aisle and the specific quality of ordinary that the place had been before and would be again. He thought about whether it would feel strange to walk back through those doors, and found that it didn't, exactly. It felt like the appropriate conclusion to something. Yeah, he said, we can do that. They went to Granger's after ice cream, the 3 of them, which was a slightly unusual configuration for a Thursday grocery run, but not one that required explanation. Emma led the way to the cereal aisle with the focus of someone completing overdue business. She found the Tiger box without hesitation, put it in the cart, and announced that the matter was resolved. Nathan was standing in the bread aisle, the same spot, when he heard his name. Mr. Cole. He turned. Sophie was standing at the end of the aisle. She wasn't behind a register. She was in street clothes, a jacket over her shoulders, a basket in her hand. Shopping, not working. She looked different out of the store uniform. Younger, somehow, and also more composed than she'd been the last time he'd seen her, which was understandable given the circumstances. Sophie, he said. She looked at him with the expression of someone who has been carrying something they want to set down. I've been hoping I'd run into you, she said. I wanted to say, I said it to the officers, but I wanted to say it to you. She stopped, recalibrating. I'm not sure what I would have done if you hadn't been there. He shook his head. You handled yourself. I froze, she said. I completely froze. You kept them talking. You didn't panic in a way that escalated anything. You stayed present. He meant it. That's not nothing. That's actually most of it. Sophie looked at him for a moment, processing the version of that night that allowed her to be a participant rather than just a victim of it. Something in her face shifted. Not relief exactly, but the beginning of a story she might eventually be able to tell without the weight of the worst part of it being the whole of it. My manager told me about the text you sent to emergency services, she said. They showed him the dispatch log. Seemed like the right call. He wants to give you something, a gift card or, I don't know, he mentioned something. She half smiled. He's not very good at gestures. Tell him the store looks good, Nathan said. That's enough. Sophie nodded. She looked past him at Emma, who was examining a box of something at the far end of the cart with the scrutiny of a product tester. Is that your daughter? That's Emma. Sophie looked at her for a moment. She's the one who was in the break room. Yes. She seems... Sophie searched for the word. Okay. She's good, Nathan said. He meant it completely. She's very good. Sophie said goodbye and went back to her shopping, and Nathan stood in the bread aisle for another moment, and then picked up a loaf and put it in the cart, because they were out, and because the bread aisle was just the bread aisle. He drove Claire to the edge of the city afterward, where her car was parked at a lot near the highway on-ramp, Emma asleep in the back seat by the time they got there. Claire got out and stood by the driver's side window, and Nathan got out too because some things required standing outside the car to say properly. Thank you, he said again. Claire looked at him in the way she always looked at him, direct and without any of the performances that most people use to negotiate difficult emotions. She talked about you the entire drive, she said. She told me you're a good watcher. He blinked. What? She said you watch things carefully. She said you know when something's wrong before other people do, and she said she's going to be like that too when she grows up. Claire tilted her head slightly. I don't think she meant it as a compliment. I think she meant it as a fact about herself. He looked at the car, at Emma's shape in the back seat, the soft architecture of a sleeping child. She's going to be all right, he said. It wasn't a question. She already is, Claire said. You both are. She put her hand briefly on his arm, the contact of one person telling another something true without making it larger than it needed to be. Go home, Nathan. He went home. He carried Emma up to the apartment without waking her, which was a feat that got marginally harder every few months as she grew, and would eventually stop being possible, and he was aware of that the way you're aware of the specific temporary nature of things you love. He put her to bed, took off her shoes, pulled the blanket up. She stirred when he was at the door. Dad, she said, mostly asleep. I'm here. Did we get the cereal? We got the cereal. A small, satisfied sound. She turned over. He stood in the hallway outside her door for a while, in the quiet of the apartment, in the familiar dark and the familiar smells, and the permanent small mess of a life actively lived. The drawing she'd given him was still in his jacket pocket. He took it out and looked at it in the hallway light. The house, the yard, the orange circle with 4 lines that was biscuit, the considerable quantity of flowers. He went to the kitchen and found a piece of tape and put the drawing on the wall above the coffee maker, where he would see it in the morning. Then he sat at the kitchen table, and for the first time in 4 days he didn't open the laptop, and he didn't run through the accounting of what he knew and what he didn't, and what the next sequence required. He just sat. The apartment was quiet in the specific way apartments are quiet late at night. Not empty, just still, the presence of the sleeping child down the hall, making the silence full rather than hollow. He thought about what the last 4 days had cost him, and what they had confirmed and what they had, he was honest enough to use the word, given back. Not the skills. He'd never lost those. What had been given back was something harder to name. A sense, maybe, that the version of himself he'd tried to leave in that other life was not a version to be afraid of. That the thing which had made him capable of walking toward danger in a grocery store and toward a facility in the county scrubland and into a confrontation in a 31st floor office was not in opposition to the man who made Emma's lunch and drove the school pickup line and put drawings on the kitchen wall. It was the same source. It had always been the same source. He'd just spent 4 years being afraid that if he looked at it directly, it would pull him back toward something he'd left behind. What the last 4 days had shown him was that it didn't work that way. The pull was there, yes. He'd been honest with himself about the relief he'd felt in the grocery store, that uncomfortable clarity. But it hadn't replaced anything. It hadn't erased the apartment, or the school, or the cereal aisle, or Emma's voice asking him to actually watch at the soccer game. Those things were still exactly what they'd been. They were, if anything, more present to him now than they'd been a week ago, in the way that things become vivid when you've had occasion to understand what their absence would mean. He was not a single thing. He had spent 4 years trying to reduce himself to the maintenance supervisor, the school pickup father, the man whose past didn't come up because he had successfully made it go away. But people were not single things. The history didn't go away. It just became part of the whole, and the whole was, if he was being truly honest, sitting alone in his kitchen at midnight, more capable of being what Emma needed than any simplified version of himself had been. His phone lit up on the table, a message from Victoria, not on the encrypted app, on his regular number, which she'd had since the first morning call and had, up until now, used only when the situation was moving fast. He looked at it. Marsh confirmed with Doyle's contact. Operation is being dissolved. All parties withdrawing. It's over. A pause in the message chain, and then, I know it's late. I just wanted you to know tonight. He looked at the message for a moment. Then he typed back, thank you for letting me know. Get some sleep. 3 minutes passed. Then, you too. He put the phone down. He thought about Victoria Sterling, the way she'd stood at the window in the first meeting, choosing not to take the power position. The way she'd sat behind her desk in the suite and kept her hands flat and her voice steady while Brecker was in the room. The way she'd said there's a difference when he'd offered the maintenance supervisor deflection one more time. She was not a simple person. She had built something real and protected it at real cost, and she had done it without the benefit of training or operational support or any of the tools Nathan had relied on, and that was its own kind of competence. He liked her. He had for a while, and he was done pretending he hadn't noticed. That was a different conversation for a different time, and he was content to let it be. In November, 2 weeks after the last message from Marsh confirming that Harlan Voss had quietly withdrawn all board-level communications regarding Sterling Technology Group, and that Carver Doyle had ceased all active inquiries related to Nathan Cole, Nathan took Emma to her soccer game on a Saturday morning and stood on the sideline in the cold with his hands in his jacket pockets and watched. Actually, watched. She was not a particularly skilled soccer player. She was enthusiastic in the way that made up for a lot, and she had a competitive instinct that occasionally exceeded her technical ability, and she fell down twice and got up both times without stopping to check whether anyone had seen. In the second half, she came close enough to scoring that the people around Nathan made sounds of anticipation, and even though the shot went wide by a solid 2 feet, Emma ran back to her position with her head up. He kept his phone in his pocket for 93 minutes. Afterward, walking back to the truck, Emma took his hand in the absent-minded way she did when she wasn't thinking about it, her cleats swinging from her other hand, the cold air putting color in her face. "Did you watch?" she said. "I watched the whole thing." "The shot in the second half?" "Wide by about 2 feet." She made a sound of dignified disagreement. "It wasn't that far." "It was close," he said. "It was genuinely close." She seemed to accept this revision. They walked the rest of the way to the truck in the easy silence of two people who had no particular need to fill the space between them. The city went on around them in the way cities go on, regardless of what any individual within them is carrying. The other parents and the other cars, and the leaf-bare trees along the park fence, and the specific November sky that was neither threatening nor promising, just present, which was usually enough. He had not returned to his former life. He had not needed to, and he had not wanted to, and the distinction between those two things had become clear to him in the past month in ways he hadn't expected. He was still the maintenance supervisor at the Caldwell Center. I was still the school pickup father and the Thursday grocery run and the Friday pizza order from the place 2 blocks over. He was still the man in the faded Henley that nobody at the Granger's store, on any ordinary Thursday, would look at twice. But he had also stopped pretending that the rest of it wasn't there. Had stopped treating it as a room with a closed door, something to be avoided and minimized and kept at careful distance. It was part of him. It was in some ways that he couldn't fully articulate and had stopped trying to, part of what made him capable of being the father Emma deserved. Because what she needed from him was not a man without a history. What she needed was a man who had been through difficult things and had come out of them knowing what mattered and being willing, when it was necessary, to act on that knowledge. He could be that. He already was that. He held her hand and walked her to the truck and drove them home through the November streets, and the city was ordinary and particular and completely itself, and so was he. That was in the end